I'm 32, and I still remember the exact pitch of my sister's laughter that night. It cut through the noise of clinking glasses and fake cheer like a blade. "Let's toast to my brother," she said, voice dripping with amusement, still the family's biggest disappointment. Everyone at the Christmas table laughed, even my parents. My mom covered her mouth, pretending to scold my sister. "Oh, Emma, don't tease your brother." But she was smiling. Dad actually raised his glass and said, "To tradition." They all drank. I sat there with my wine untouched, my smile tight, my heart pounding against my ribs. I wanted to say something, anything, but I'd done that before. Every time I spoke up, I was told I was too sensitive, that I should learn to take a joke. So I smiled instead. I poured my drink, looked at each of them, and said calmly, "Enjoy it. This is the last holiday I'll ever spend with you." Then I stood up, left the table, and walked out the front door without another word. But let me back up, because that moment didn't come out of nowhere. It was years, decades of build-up. My name's Daniel. I grew up in a family that treated success like a scoreboard, and I was always the one who didn't measure up. My dad owned a construction company, a big one in our state. He started it from scratch when he was 23, and by the time I was born, he already had multiple crews, trucks, and a nice house with a view of the river. To him, success was everything. And failure, well, that was me. I wasn't bad at anything in particular. I just wasn't Emma. She was 3 years younger, but somehow always 10 steps ahead in their eyes. Straight A's, debate team captain, Ivy League graduate. She had this way of talking that made adults lean in and listen, while I was the kid who needed to find his passion. When I was 17, I told Dad I wanted to go into architecture. I'd always been fascinated by the design side of his business, how structures came together, how something on paper could become real. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Architects don't make money unless they're famous. Stick to construction, where the real work happens." I did. I went to a local college, got a degree in business management, and joined his company after graduation. I started at the bottom, literally sweeping the floors of our main warehouse, and worked my way up to project coordinator. I thought he'd respect that maybe if I worked hard enough, I'd finally earn his approval. But every time I did something right, Emma did something extraordinary. When I landed a new client, she got published in a business magazine. When I handled a $1 million project flawlessly, she gave a TEDx talk about women in leadership, and Dad sent the link to everyone he knew. She didn't even work in the same industry. She was in finance. But somehow, she always managed to tie herself to his success story. My dad taught me everything about ambition, she'd say in interviews. Not once did she mention me. Still, I kept showing up. I kept putting in the hours, dealing with stubborn clients, late invoices, broken equipment, all the stuff Dad didn't have time for anymore. I thought one day he'd see that I was the one actually keeping things running. Then last year, he set up what he called the Family Business Fund. The idea was to create a joint investment pool between the three of us, him, Emma, and me, to expand into property development. Each of us would contribute a certain amount, and profits would be split proportionally. It sounded fair enough at first, until I saw the fine print. Emma's contribution? Half of mine. Her share of the profits? The same as mine. When I pointed it out, Dad said, "She's bringing her expertise and her network. You're bringing sweat. It balances out." I remember sitting there in his office, the walls lined with old photographs of construction sites and blueprints, thinking how ironic it was that the man who taught me hard work beats everything suddenly decided that hard work didn't count. I almost walked away then. I should have, but something in me wanted to prove him wrong. I signed the contract. I put in the money. For months, I worked double shifts while Emma consulted. She showed up to one meeting, offered vague advice about diversifying assets, and then disappeared again. Meanwhile, I managed crews, negotiated with suppliers, and handled site delays. And when the first property finally went on the market, it was me who had secured the permits, organized the contractors, and made sure everything stayed under budget. When the profit reports came in, Dad hosted a dinner to celebrate. That was the first time I noticed the shift. Emma's name was on every congratulatory speech. Emma's insights really paid off, Dad said. Emma's financial strategies saved us. I sat there, fork frozen halfway to my mouth, thinking, what insights? She hadn't even seen the property. After dinner, I pulled him aside. I told him the truth, that I'd handled the entire thing. That if it weren't for me, The project would have collapsed before breaking ground. He didn't even look surprised. "That's what you're supposed to do, son," he said. "You're the worker. She's the visionary." That night, I drove home in silence. I didn't even turn the radio on. I just stared out at the road and realized that no matter what I did, I'd never stop being the disappointment. So when Christmas came around, I already knew what kind of night it was going to be. My parents' house looked like something out of a holiday commercial. Warm lights, expensive decorations, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon. Emma arrived late, wearing a designer coat and carrying gifts that looked like they came from a luxury store window. Everyone rushed to greet her, as if she were royalty. When I handed Mom the wine I brought, she smiled politely and said, "Oh, you didn't have to bring anything, honey. Emma already took care of the drinks." Then she set my bottle aside, unopened. Dinner was worse. Every conversation somehow circled back to Emma's job, her apartment in New York, her new boyfriend, who was such a gentleman. I tried to chime in once, mentioned a new contract I'd closed with a real estate developer, but Dad interrupted me mid-sentence to ask Emma about her upcoming presentation in Chicago. The whole table turned toward her, and just like that, I was invisible again. Then came the toast. She lifted her glass, looked right at me, and said that line I'll never forget. "Let's toast to my brother, still the family's biggest disappointment." It was the kind of line that sounds like a joke to everyone else, but feels like a punch to the stomach when it's aimed at you. And the laughter that followed, that was the part that broke something inside me. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just smiled, poured my drink, and told them to enjoy it, because it was the last holiday I'd ever spend with them. When I left, no one stopped me. Not even Mom. She just said, "Don't be dramatic, Daniel. It's Christmas." But 2 days later, everything changed. I was at my office, sorting through some files, when my phone rang. It was Emma. Her voice was shaky. "Daniel," she said, "you didn't pull out of Dad's business fund, did you?" I looked down at the contract sitting on my desk, the one I'd been reviewing all morning, and for the first time in a long time, I felt calm. I didn't answer her right away. I just let the silence stretch. Because in that moment, I realized she finally understood something I'd known for years. Without me, none of it worked. And as I picked up my pen and looked at the signature line, a small, almost imperceptible smile crept across my face. That's where things started to shift. After that Christmas night, everything between us became quiet, but not the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the sort that hums under your skin, the kind that means something's about to give. My parents didn't call. Emma didn't text. It was as if my absence was easier for them than my presence ever was. And honestly, I thought I was fine with that. For a while, I even convinced myself I didn't care. But silence has a funny way of forcing you to think. When I walked out that night, I didn't just leave a house. I left a lifetime of trying to earn approval that was never coming. Still, part of me kept wondering if they'd reach out, if maybe this time someone would realize they'd gone too far. They didn't. A week after Christmas, my father sent a group message titled "Quick Business Check-in." No "hope you're well," no acknowledgement of what happened, just numbers and deadlines. That's who he was. Feelings didn't belong in business, and unfortunately, our family ran like one. I didn't reply. Not immediately. I wanted him to feel what it was like when someone you relied on went silent. And apparently, that silence rattled him more than I expected, because the next day, he called me directly. "Daniel," he said, tone clipped, like we were in a meeting. "We need to finalize the numbers for the new development. I assume you're still on board." I leaned back in my chair. "I don't know. I've been thinking about stepping back." "Stepping back?" His voice tightened. "You can't just walk away in the middle of a project." "I can," I said evenly. "It's my money in the fund, not yours." He exhaled sharply. "It's our money, Daniel. Don't make this about pride. You've always had a tendency to take things personally." I almost laughed. Take things personally? After years of being treated like a placeholder in my own father's company? "Maybe that's because it is personal, Dad," I said quietly. "You've made sure of that." He didn't respond. Just hung up. That's when I knew I'd struck a nerve. The following days were strange. I went into the office and noticed small shifts. My access to certain files had been restricted. The financial dashboard I used to track our investments suddenly required administrator approval. The admin? Emma. When I confronted the accountant, a nervous man named Robert who had worked for Dad for 15 years, he stammered something about new internal controls and Emma's request. She said it's just temporary, he murmured, avoiding eye contact. I nodded slowly. Right, temporary. By the end of the week, I realized what they were doing. They were freezing me out, quietly, strategically, like I was a liability. And I might have accepted that if it weren't for the company retreat. It was in late January, held at one of the new properties we'd recently acquired. Normally, those retreats were for managers and key investors. But when the invitation went out, my name wasn't on it. I found out by accident when one of the site's supervisors mentioned how Emma was flying in for the weekend event. I called Dad immediately. Hey, I said, keeping my voice steady. I didn't get an invite for the retreat. There was a pause. It's more of a small strategy session this year, he said finally. Emma wanted to focus on the financial side, not the operations. Financial side? I repeated. Dad, I'm the one who. He cut me off. Daniel, let it go. You've been under a lot of stress lately. Take some time for yourself. That's when I heard her laugh in the background. Faint, but unmistakable. Is that Emma? I asked. Don't start, he said, his tone sharp now. She's helping me with a few reports. Of course she is, I said. Because I'm the one who needs to take time for myself. The call ended not long after that. And just like that, I wasn't invited to my own company's planning retreat. The following Monday, I walked into the office to find Emma sitting at my desk. My desk. She looked up, smiled politely, and said, Oh, Daniel, didn't you check your email? We're reorganizing departments. You'll be in the field office from now on. I stared at her for a moment. You're kidding. Not at all, she said sweetly. Dad thought you'd like being closer to the projects. You know, hands-on. It's what you're good at. That last sentence stung more than she probably realized. Or maybe she realized exactly what she was doing. I wanted to snap, to tell her she'd never last a day out on a construction site in the freezing wind, but I didn't. I just nodded and said, Got it. That night, I stayed late at the office. When everyone else had gone home, I logged into the old backup system, the one no one but I knew existed. Years ago, I'd set up a mirrored server for project data after losing files during a power outage. It wasn't connected to the main network anymore, but it still stored everything: financials, contracts, correspondence. That's when I found something odd. In one of the fund folders, there was a file labeled Property Reallocation Agreement, Draft. It was dated just 2 days earlier. Curious, I opened it. The document outlined a plan to transfer the ownership of one of our key development properties, one I had personally managed, from our joint fund to a newly formed holding company. The company's directors? My father and Emma. My name wasn't anywhere. My chest went tight. I scrolled to the signature lines, and though they were blank, I could see where they intended to sign. The message was clear. They were cutting me out completely. For the first time in years, I didn't feel sad or angry. I felt focused. They had finally made their move, and that meant I could make mine. I printed the document, folded it neatly, and slid it into my briefcase. Over the next week, I played dumb. I showed up at the field office, oversaw site work, signed invoices, and acted like nothing had changed. Meanwhile, I quietly met with a friend from college, Sarah, who now worked as a corporate attorney. When I showed her the document, she frowned. They can't just reallocate assets from a joint fund without your consent. You have equal ownership. That's what I thought, I said. She leaned back in her chair, studying me. What's your endgame here, Daniel? You want to fight them? I hesitated before answering. No, not yet. I want them to think they've already won. Because if there's one thing my father and sister had always underestimated, it was how much I learned from them. Years of watching their manipulation taught me patience. February rolled around, and Emma started showing up to the office more often. She made suggestions that somehow always turned into orders. She'd CC Dad on every email, making sure I looked uncooperative whenever I questioned her. One afternoon, she even called me out during a team meeting. Daniel, you didn't submit last week's progress report, she said in front of everyone. I sent it on Thursday, I replied. She smiled that perfect PR-trained smile. Well, I didn't get it. Maybe check your sent folder next time. I knew she was lying. She'd deleted my email from the shared inbox. But saying that out loud would have made me look paranoid. So I bit my tongue, nodded, and said, sure thing. After the meeting, one of the site engineers pulled me aside. Hey, man, what's going on between you and Emma? She's been off. I just shrugged. Family stuff. That was the thing about working in a family business. You couldn't ever escape the personal. Every professional decision came laced with old wounds. Every argument felt like reliving childhood all over again. Then, on Valentine's Day, it got worse. I received an official notice from the bank overseeing our fund. According to the letter, there had been a temporary suspension of disbursements due to internal restructuring. Translation: Dad and Emma were freezing the account. My name was on the notice as a partner, but I hadn't been informed or consulted. I drove straight to Dad's office. He was sitting behind his desk, flipping through a magazine when I walked in. "Why is the fund frozen?" I asked. He looked up, expression calm. "It's just a precaution. Emma's reviewing some numbers." Without telling me, "Daniel," he sighed, "you've been emotional lately. We can't have instability when real money is involved." I stared at him, trying to decide whether to laugh or scream. "Emotional? You mean because I walked out on Christmas after being humiliated?" He didn't even flinch. "You overreacted. It was a joke." I leaned forward. "You let her mock me in front of everyone, Dad." "That wasn't a joke. It was cruelty." "She didn't mean it that way," he said, waving a hand. "You're too sensitive." There it was again. That word. Sensitive. It was his favorite way of dismissing me. The same word he'd used when I was 12 and came home crying after he forgot to show up for my baseball game. The same word he used when I told him how small I felt next to Emma. Something in me hardened right then. I left his office without another word. But as I closed the door behind me, I caught a glimpse of Emma in the hallway, whispering to one of the investors. She smiled when she saw me, a smug, knowing smile. That's when I decided I was done playing defense. Over the next few weeks, I gathered everything: copies of contracts, digital correspondence, financial reports. I stayed quiet, cooperative even, but every signature they made, every minor adjustment they pushed through, I recorded. By March, they thought they had me cornered. They'd even begun discussing a phase-out plan for my role, which they claimed was for efficiency. I wasn't supposed to know about it, but I did. Sarah had helped me install a monitoring clause in our system's access logs months ago. Every document they viewed or altered under the fund's account triggered an alert to my inbox. The last alert I got came late on a Friday night. It was another reallocation draft, this time finalized. The next step would be their signatures. That's when everything started to shift. And the very next morning, I got a text from Emma. "Hey, just checking in. Have you reviewed the latest fund statement? Might be worth a look." I didn't reply. I didn't have to, because by then, the contract wasn't the only thing sitting on my desk. Something much bigger was. And that's where things started to turn in a way none of them saw coming. It was the morning of March 14th when I found out what they'd done. I woke up to a flood of unread messages, texts, emails, notifications from business accounts I didn't even know were tied to my name. My phone buzzed nonstop, vibrating across the nightstand like it was alive. When I finally picked it up, the first thing I saw was a message from our property manager. "Daniel, we've been told the ownership transfer for the Riverside lot has gone through. Should I be sending updates to Emma from now on?" For a second, I thought I'd read it wrong. Ownership transfer? I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't approved anything. But when I checked my inbox, there it was, an automated confirmation from the county registrar's office, listing the transfer of the property title from our joint fund to a new company. The name of the company? ENR Holdings, LLC. ENR, Emma and Richard. My father's first name. My hands went cold. I scrolled further and saw the document ID, the digital signature log, and my name. My signature, staring back at me, except I hadn't signed it. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the screen, my coffee untouched and going cold. Then the anger hit, the kind that doesn't explode but seeps in like poison. My father and sister had forged my signature. I grabbed my car keys and drove straight to the office. The whole way there, my thoughts were a blur of disbelief and fury. The streets blurred by, spring sunlight flickering across the windshield, and all I could think was, they really did it. They actually did it. When I arrived, the receptionist, a young woman named Kelly who'd started only a few months ago, looked up from her desk and gave me that awkward smile people wear when they know something you don't. "Good morning, Daniel," she said, voice tight. "Mr. Reynolds and Emma are in the conference room." I didn't bother knocking. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. They were sitting across from each other, calm as could be. Dad looked up first. "Daniel," he said, like I'd just interrupted a friendly chat. "Good timing. We were just." "What did you do?" I snapped. Emma blinked. "Excuse me. Don't play dumb." You transferred the Riverside property. I threw my phone on the table, the screen lighting up with the document confirmation. You forged my signature. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Emma exhaled, tilting her head slightly like I was a child throwing a tantrum. Daniel, no one forged anything. It was a procedural necessity. We're restructuring the assets under a new entity. Without me, you'll still receive your share. Dad interjected quickly, voice even. Nothing's changed for you financially. I stared at him. You transferred my property into a company I'm not even part of. He gave that familiar sigh, the one that meant he was about to say something patronizing. Listen, you're overreacting again. The new company structure is for tax efficiency. Emma and I had to act fast. You were dragging your feet, and we couldn't afford delays. Tax efficiency? I repeated, laughing in disbelief. You forged my name for tax efficiency. Emma folded her hands. No one forged anything. Dad had power of attorney from the previous agreement. That stopped me cold. What power of attorney? She smiled faintly. The one you signed when the fund was created. I felt the room tilt for a second. I remembered that contract, the one from over a year ago. I'd read every clause carefully, or at least I thought I had. But there'd been an addendum page attached near the end, one that my father had insisted was just standard authorization for joint account management. I signed it without thinking twice. That's when it hit me. They'd planned this from the start. My voice came out low and steady. You manipulated me. Dad's expression hardened. Watch your tone. You used me, I said, ignoring him. You built this whole project on my work, my management, my money, and now you're pushing me out. Emma leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. Daniel, we're not pushing you out. You're still part of the overall fund. But you have to admit you've been inconsistent lately. You walked out on Christmas, stopped showing up to some meetings, refused to respond to business emails for days. Investors are starting to question your stability. I almost laughed. You mean you're questioning it? Don't hide behind investors. Her voice sharpened. This isn't personal. It's business. I took a slow breath, forcing myself not to lose it. Right? Business. I grabbed my phone off the table. Then you won't mind if my lawyer takes a look at this business decision. That finally cracked her composure. Her eyes flickered to Dad, who stood up slowly, pressing both palms on the table. Daniel, he said, his voice low now. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You signed the documents. It's done. There's no reason to drag lawyers into family matters. Family matters? I said quietly. You mean like Christmas dinner? Or maybe the years of pretending I wasn't good enough to stand next to her. His jaw tightened. You're being emotional again. That was it. That word again. That same word he'd used to shut me down since I was a kid. Emotional. I repeated. No, Dad. I'm done being emotional. I'm being clear. I picked up my briefcase and headed for the door. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Behind me, Emma said something under her breath, but I didn't catch it. I didn't care. I left the office and didn't look back. By the time I got home, the anger had burned into something colder, resolve. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at my desk, and started going through the backup server again. This time, I wasn't just looking for contracts. I wanted proof, emails, message logs, timestamps, anything that showed intent. It didn't take long. Buried in a shared folder labeled Meeting Notes, Internal Use, was a series of draft memos. Each one was written by Emma, detailing the transition plan for our assets. One of them even included a line that made my stomach turn. Once Daniel's share is transferred under ENR Holdings, we can restructure the agreement to minimize his involvement. Dad believes he'll calm down eventually. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I printed the memo, along with every related document, and filed them neatly in a binder. A few hours later, I got a text from Mom. Your father told me you're being difficult again. Please don't make things worse for yourself. You know how he gets when he's stressed. That hit harder than I wanted to admit. My own mother, always the peacekeeper, always siding with the stronger voice. For years she'd played the role of mediator, but never once had she actually defended me. It was always, don't fight with your father, or Emma didn't mean it that way. I didn't even reply. Instead, I called Sarah, my lawyer friend. I told her everything. The forged signature, the transfer, the old contract clause. She was silent for a moment, then said, they overplayed their hand. I can file an injunction by tomorrow morning. If we act fast, we can freeze all assets under the fund until this is resolved. I nodded. Do it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the years I'd spent trying to be good enough for them. Every late night at the office. Every project I saved. Every, you'll get there someday, pat on the back that meant nothing. By dawn, something inside me had hardened completely. I wasn't the same Daniel they'd spent years underestimating. When I walked into the office the next day, people looked at me differently. Word travels fast in family businesses, faster than truth. Emma must have already spun her version of the story, because I caught snippets of conversation as I passed. He's suing his own family? Guess the rumors were true. I heard he's unstable. I didn't care. I went straight to my office, shut the door, and waited for the call. At 10:17 a.m., Sarah texted. Injunction filed. They've been served. Not 5 minutes later, my office phone rang. It was Dad. Daniel, he said, his voice tight. What have you done? I leaned back in my chair. I just made sure my assets stopped disappearing without my consent. You froze the account, he snapped. Do you have any idea what that does to our liquidity? To the contractors depending on those funds. Maybe you should have thought about that before stealing from me. This isn't stealing, he hissed. This is business. You're destroying our reputation. I laughed quietly. You already did that when you taught your daughter that betrayal is just another negotiation tactic. There was a pause, and then his voice lowered to something almost venomous. You're finished here, Daniel. Don't ever come back to this office again. He hung up. For a long time, I just sat there. Then I smiled, not out of joy, but because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being cornered. But just as I was beginning to think I had regained control, the real betrayal hit. Later that week, I received an email from our bank, a formal notice stating that my access to the business account had been revoked due to a change in managing authority. It didn't make sense. I was one of the signatories. When I called to demand an explanation, the representative hesitated before saying, according to the documents on file, your shares have been liquidated. The funds were transferred to ENR Holdings. I felt my throat go dry. What documents? Signed authorization forms, the rep said. Filed by your father, under power of attorney. I ended the call and just sat there, motionless. It was over. They hadn't just stolen one property. They'd taken everything. The fund, the assets, the company shares. All of it. And that's when I realized something even worse. They hadn't done it out of greed. They'd done it to break me. They wanted me gone. And I was ready to make them regret it. The following days were a blur, a heavy, colorless fog that swallowed everything I'd built. I woke up every morning to new messages from banks, lawyers, and clients, each one like a nail being driven deeper. The words authorization revoked, account restructured, contract reassigned, repeated so often that they stopped feeling real. The company email stopped working first. I tried logging in one morning, and the system just said, access denied. Then my work phone was disconnected. The next day, I got a letter, delivered by courier, of course, terminating my position due to irreconcilable differences and breach of trust. Breach of trust. That one stung. They took everything I'd built, and somehow I was the one who'd breached something. It wasn't even about money at that point. It was about erasure. They'd gone beyond cutting me out of the business. They were rewriting the story to make it seem like I'd never mattered. My father was giving interviews about restructuring the family enterprise, talking about a streamlined leadership team focused on the next generation. Emma, naturally, was the face of it all. Her photo was everywhere, polished, confident, sitting beside Dad at board meetings like she'd earned it. And me? I was a ghost. The house felt different, too. Colder. My desk at home, once covered in project notes and blueprints, sat empty except for a single framed photo. Me, Dad, and Emma from 10 years ago, all in hard hats, standing on a construction site. Dad's arm was around her shoulder. Mine was empty. I stared at it for a long time, realizing it had always been that way. Still, I tried to fight. I really did. Sarah helped me file a lawsuit challenging the forged signatures and unauthorized transfers. For a moment, I thought maybe the truth would win. But Dad's lawyers were faster, sharper, and, most importantly, richer. They buried us under motions, delays, and technicalities. Every time I thought I'd made progress, another door slammed shut. 3 weeks later, the judge denied the injunction. The assets remained frozen, but under their control, not mine. Sarah told me it was temporary, that we could appeal, but I could hear the hesitation in her voice. Daniel, she said one night over the phone, they've spent months preparing for this. You were blindsided. I just want what's mine, I said quietly. I know, she replied. But they've turned this into a war of attrition. They think you'll run out of energy or money. And she was right about the money part. My savings were bleeding out fast. I hadn't realized how much of my personal finances were intertwined with the business, the car lease, the mortgage, even the insurance plans. All company linked. By the start of April, I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring at a spreadsheet that told me I had maybe 2 months before I'd have to sell the house. It was strange, though. Losing everything didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, like the sound of a door closing softly after someone walks out. I remember one morning waking up to sunlight streaming through the blinds, hearing birds outside, and realizing for the first time in years that I didn't have anywhere to be. No meetings, no calls, no reports. Just silence. It should have felt like freedom. It didn't. It felt like I'd been erased. Mom called a few times during those weeks, leaving voicemails filled with guilt and half-hearted concern. Your father's worried about you, she said in one. You need to stop this fight, Daniel. It's tearing the family apart. I deleted every message without listening to the end. One afternoon, I got a knock at the door. It was Emma. She looked flawless, as always. Perfectly styled hair, expensive coat, sunglasses perched on her head like she'd just stepped out of a magazine cover. She held a manila envelope in her hand. Can I come in? She asked. I didn't move. What do you want? She sighed, giving that rehearsed look of concern. Dad thought it might be better if we settled this privately. You're only making things worse for yourself, Daniel. I crossed my arms. Worse than losing everything. Her eyes softened, though I could tell it was fake. You're making this emotional again. You've always been too. Don't. I cut her off. Don't say it. She hesitated, then handed me the envelope. It's an offer. We're willing to buy out your shares. You'll get a fair payout and can move on with your life. I opened it. Inside was a typed agreement and a check. The number on it made me laugh, loudly, bitterly. It was barely a fraction of what my investment alone had been worth. This is an insult, I said, tossing the paper back at her. It's generous, she replied coolly, considering you almost tanked the company with your little stunt. By trying to stop you from stealing it. By making it public, she snapped. Do you have any idea how much damage control I had to do? Investors panicked. We almost lost a major deal. There it was again, we. Always we. As if I'd never existed. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You could have done this the right way, Emma. We could have built something together. But you and Dad decided the only way to win was to erase me. She met my gaze without flinching. Because you were never built for this, Daniel. You always wanted to be liked, not respected. Dad needed someone ruthless. I felt my pulse in my jaw. Congratulations, I said quietly. You found your perfect reflection. She didn't respond. Just picked up the envelope and turned to leave. But before she did, she paused by the door. You know, she said softly, if you just stayed in your lane, you'd still have a place here. And then she was gone. That night, I sat in the dark for hours. The anger had burned itself out. What was left was a dull ache, disappointment, betrayal, exhaustion. I poured myself a drink, stared at the ceiling, and thought about everything I'd done for them. Every sacrifice. Every time I'd stayed late to fix something just so Dad wouldn't have to. Every time I let Emma take credit just to keep the peace. And it hit me. This wasn't just a one-time betrayal. It was the final act of a lifetime pattern. They'd always taken. I'd always given. Something needed to change. The next morning, I made coffee and sat down at my desk. For the first time in weeks, I didn't open legal documents or financial reports. I opened a blank notebook. I started writing down names. People I'd worked with over the years, contractors, architects, property brokers, clients. People who knew me, trusted me, owed me favors, or at least respected my work. I didn't know exactly what I was planning yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to crawl back. That afternoon, I met with Sarah again. She looked exhausted but proud. You still want to keep fighting? She asked. I shook my head. No, I want to build something new. She smiled faintly. Now you sound like your dad. No, I said quietly. I sound like someone who finally learned from him. I spent the next few weeks doing something that surprised even me, walking away. I stopped replying to their letters. I withdrew the lawsuit. It wasn't surrender. It was strategy, because I'd realized something. As long as I kept fighting them on their turf, I'd never win. They controlled the money, the lawyers, the narrative. But outside of that, they had no idea how to stand without me. Meanwhile, I started making quiet moves, reaching out to old contacts, gathering data, rebuilding connections. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning, not even Sarah. I just said I needed time. The bitterness was still there, but it started turning into something sharper, colder, purposeful. Every night, I'd sit at that same desk, staring at the old photo of the three of us. And every night, I'd remind myself of the look on Emma's face when I refused her deal. That flash of irritation behind the calm. That tiny crack in her armor. They thought they destroyed me. But what they didn't realize was that I'd stopped trying to get back what was taken. Now, I wanted something else entirely. I wanted them to need me again and realize too late that I was gone. And quietly, patiently, I started laying the groundwork for that day. The strange thing about losing everything is that once it's all gone, you stop being afraid of it happening again. There's a quiet freedom in having nothing left for people to take. That realization changed something in me, hardened me, maybe, but also made me sharper than I'd ever been. It started small. A favor here, a phone call there. People I hadn't spoken to in years, subcontractors, old clients, even a few city permit officers, reached out once they heard I'd left my father's company. Most of them assumed I'd been pushed out, but they didn't ask for details. They just said things like, "Sorry it went down that way, Daniel. You were the only one who ever treated us fair." That surprised me at first. For years, I'd thought of myself as invisible, the one who did the grunt work while Emma got the praise. But outside those walls, people had noticed. They remembered who actually solved problems instead of passing blame. By mid-May, I had a list of contacts longer than I expected. I didn't have money, at least, not much, but I had credibility. And that, I realized, was worth something. I started meeting with people in quiet coffee shops and half-finished construction sites, pitching ideas I'd been sitting on for years: modern eco-housing, sustainable renovations for old city buildings, small-scale projects with big impact. The kind of ideas Dad would have laughed at for not being profitable enough. At first, it felt strange working alone. No office, no staff, no fancy logo. Just me, my laptop, and a rented co-working desk downtown. But every time I sat there drafting a proposal, it felt like I could breathe again. No more walking on eggshells, no more second-guessing every word. One day, an old client named Howard called me out of the blue. He was a developer who'd worked with our family company years ago on a big riverfront project, one Emma had nearly ruined by pushing an unrealistic deadline. "I heard about the split," he said. "Sorry, kid, but honestly, you're better off. Your dad's company hasn't been the same since you left." "Thanks," I said carefully. "I'm working on something new. Smaller scale, but cleaner." He chuckled. "You always were the practical one. Send me your plans. Maybe I'll throw you a project to get started." That was the first spark. Within a month, Howard introduced me to another investor, then another. One of them, a retired architect named Linda, told me over lunch, "I'd rather put my money behind someone who knows the ground than someone who just gives orders from a desk." That sentence stuck with me. Someone who knows the ground. That's what I built my new company around. Hands-on, transparent, built from the ground up. I named it Groundline Developments. It started with a single project, a mid-size renovation on the outskirts of the city. Nothing glamorous, but it was mine. Every nail, every blueprint, every permit went through me. I hired the same workers my father had laid off years earlier when he streamlined operations. They were loyal. They remembered how I treated them when I was just a project coordinator. And they worked like they wanted to prove something, too. We finished the first site under budget and ahead of schedule. The client was thrilled. 2 more contracts came in right after. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was building again. It was late June when I got my first taste of poetic irony. A supplier I'd used for years called me, sounding nervous. "Hey, Daniel, small heads up," he said. "Your sister reached out. She wanted to move all future contracts from your dad's company to exclusive terms with us. Thought you should know." I smiled. "And what did you say?" He laughed. "I told her we're already under contract with you." That moment stayed with me for days. It wasn't revenge, not yet, but it was the first flicker of balance tilting back in my favor. Meanwhile, I kept things quiet. I didn't post about Groundline. I didn't announce anything. I wanted to grow under the radar, out of sight, out of reach. My father and Emma had the name, the connections, and the press. But I had something better, people who actually trusted me. By late summer, things snowballed faster than I could have imagined. A local magazine ran a feature titled The Rebirth of Honest Building. It mentioned ground line, calling it a rare example of ethical construction in an industry riddled with shortcuts. The article even quoted Howard saying, "Daniel Reynolds is the future of this city's development, practical, steady, and visionary." The irony wasn't lost on me. My father had spent decades trying to get that kind of reputation. I'd stumbled into it by simply doing the opposite of him. A few weeks after that article came out, I was invited to speak at a sustainability conference. Just a small local event, nothing major. But when I stepped on that stage and saw the crowd, builders, investors, young architects, I realized I wasn't invisible anymore. After my talk, a man in a gray suit approached me. "You're Richard Reynolds' son, right?" he asked. I nodded, a little wary. He smiled. "I did some contracting for your dad back in the day. Heard you're doing things differently. It's refreshing. You ever think about expanding?" I didn't answer immediately, because I had been thinking about it. A lot. Ground line was growing faster than I could handle alone. I'd been reinvesting every cent into new projects, but we were nearing the point where I needed serious funding. That man, his name was Alan Price, turned out to be exactly the kind of partner I needed. A quiet investor with deep pockets and zero interest in publicity. "I don't want control," he said when we met again. "I just want to back someone who still believes integrity can make money." That sealed it. Within a month, Alan had invested enough for me to open a second office, ironically, in the same district as my father's headquarters. It was strange driving past that old building again. The same logo still hung over the entrance, but the parking lot was half empty. The rumor was that their latest development had stalled due to budgetary mismanagement. I knew what that meant. They'd overreached, as always, counting on appearances over planning. And it didn't surprise me when, a few weeks later, I got a call from an old colleague who still worked for them. "Daniel," he said carefully, "you didn't hear this from me, but things over there are falling apart. Emma's been arguing with your dad nonstop. Investors are nervous. They lost 2 major clients. Both switched to independent developers." I said nothing, but I didn't have to ask who those clients were. I already knew. By fall, Ground Line had 5 projects under construction. We were profitable. I'd hired back several people from my father's company, not out of pity, but because they deserved better leadership. I started sleeping again. Real sleep, not the anxious, shallow kind that had haunted me for years. My mornings were quiet, peaceful. Coffee at sunrise, calls with teams who respected me, evenings spent walking through job sites instead of arguing in glass offices. And yet, there was a part of me that stayed cold, that remembered every word, every smirk, every toast at that Christmas table. I didn't dwell on revenge, but I didn't forget it either. One Friday evening, I got a call I didn't expect. It was Mom. "Daniel," she said softly, "your father's worried." I almost laughed. "Worried about what?" "That I'm still breathing." "Don't be cruel," she said quickly. "He's struggling. Business isn't good." I leaned back in my chair. "I'm sure Emma's got it handled." There was a pause. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, "They haven't spoken in weeks." That stopped me. "What?" "She blames him for a deal that fell through. He blames her for bad management." "It's ugly, Daniel. I don't even go into the office anymore." I said nothing. For years, they'd treated me like an outsider, and now they were turning on each other. "Your father asked me to tell you," Mom continued hesitantly, "that he'd like to meet. He said maybe it's time to talk." I let the silence stretch. Then I said, "Tell him I'm busy." That night, I sat alone in my office, watching the city lights flicker outside the window. My company, was thriving. The people who'd dismissed me were faltering. And yet, I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. This wasn't revenge. Not the real kind. Revenge wasn't proving them wrong. It was making them realize they'd destroyed the very thing that could have saved them. And I had a feeling that day was coming soon. Because just as Ground Line reached its peak, a new opportunity landed in my lap. One that would bring everything full circle. An investment firm contacted me about a property auction, a half-developed lot along the river. It was familiar, too familiar. The same one my father and Emma had stolen from me months ago. ENR Holdings was selling it off at a loss. The contract sat open on my screen, glowing softly in the dark. I didn't sign it that night. I just stared at the number, the same way I had when Emma called crying weeks before. And this time I smiled. Because for the first time in my life, the balance of power wasn't just shifting. It was already mine. When I saw the property listing that night, I sat back in my chair and let out a quiet laugh. There it was, the same riverside development that had started everything. The land they'd stolen with forged signatures. The project they'd built their empire around. Now it was up for auction, bleeding money. I clicked through the documents. Half-built infrastructure, unpaid contractors, pending lawsuits from environmental regulators. Whoever took it over would inherit a disaster. To most investors, it was toxic. But to me, it was poetry. I called Alan first thing in the morning. "You still in the mood for a challenge?" I asked. He chuckled. "You sound like you've got something dangerous in mind." "Not dangerous," I said. "Just poetic." I showed him the file. He skimmed it, raised an eyebrow, and smiled. "You really want this?" "I need this," I said simply. Within 2 weeks, Groundline Developments had quietly entered the bidding process under a shell company I'd set up years ago, one that didn't carry my name. The goal was simple. No one could know it was me. If Dad or Emma caught even a whiff of my involvement, they'd pull every string they had to block it. The auction day arrived on a gray Thursday morning in November. I sat in a conference room downtown, coffee in hand, surrounded by a dozen other bidders. The representative from ENR Holdings was there too, a tall man in a navy suit. Emma wasn't present, but her signature was on every document. That alone made it satisfying. The bidding started low. Numbers climbed. People dropped out one by one. The property was toxic, yes, but valuable in the right hands, especially if those hands already knew every hidden flaw, every corner they'd cut, every lie they'd told investors to inflate its value. By the final round, only 2 bidders remained, a mid-tier developer from Chicago and my shell company. "Final call," the auctioneer said. "Any further bids?" I raised my paddle. 3.6. Silence. Then the auctioneer's gavel came down. "Sold." I didn't smile right away. I just sat there, calm, steady. My chest felt tight in that slow, controlled way that comes from watching a loop finally close. After the paperwork was finalized, Alan turned to me. "You just bought your father's legacy." "No," I said. "I bought his mistake." We began work within a week. The site was a mess, half-finished foundations, incomplete permits, unpaid workers. But unlike them, I didn't rely on shortcuts. We stripped everything back to clean ground and rebuilt properly. Within 3 months, the project that had bankrupted ENR Holdings was turning into a sleek, sustainable residential complex. Investors loved it. The city loved it. And I made sure everyone knew it was a Groundline project. By the time the marketing banners went up, the name ENR Holdings had become synonymous with failure. That's when the phone call started. First came the contractors. "Your dad's company still owes us money," one said. "They promised payment months ago." Then came the suppliers. "We're switching over to you, Daniel. They can't even cover invoices." It wasn't intentional revenge, at least not at first. It was just the natural gravity of reputation. But as their house of cards started collapsing, I realized how much they had depended on the illusion of control. Without the property, without me, their foundation crumbled. And then came the call I'd been waiting for. I was in my office late one evening when my phone buzzed. The caller ID read private number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Daniel," came my father's voice. I leaned back in my chair, letting a long silence stretch. "You must be desperate." "Don't do that," he said sharply. His voice sounded different, thinner, older. "We need to talk." "About what?" "The Riverside development." I smiled faintly. "Oh, you mean my development?" He hesitated. "You bought it." "I know it was you." "I didn't buy it," I said calmly. "My company did. I just happened to build something out of the ashes you left." He was quiet for a long time before saying, "We could have worked together, you know." I was trying to protect what I built. "By stealing from me?" "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that," I said, my tone flat. "You took what wasn't yours, called it family, and expected me to be grateful." His voice broke slightly. "You don't understand what it's like to carry a business, to have everyone depending on you." "I do," I said quietly, "because now I'm the one they depend on." There was another silence. Then he said softly, "Emma's leaving. She's moving to New York. Investors pulled out. She says I ruined everything." I stared out the window, watching the reflection of the city lights shimmer against the glass. She's right, I said. He exhaled shakily. I just wanted this family to stay together. Families don't stay together by control, I said. They stay together by trust. And you broke every ounce of it. He didn't respond. Then, finally, he whispered, so that's it. I thought for a long moment before answering. No, Dad. That's balance. I hung up. After that, everything moved fast. The Riverside project opened in March, a clean, modern development that sold out within weeks. Groundline's reputation skyrocketed. Journalists called it a comeback story that redefined resilience. One article even mentioned how the site had once belonged to a failed family venture. No names, but everyone knew. And that's when Emma reached out. Her email came late at night. Short, polished, polite. Daniel, congratulations on the Riverside project. It's impressive work. I was wondering if you'd be open to a meeting. There might be room for collaboration, or at least closure. Closure. That word tasted like irony. Still, I agreed. We met at a small restaurant downtown, the kind of neutral territory where people pretend to be civil. She looked different, tired, maybe even humbled. But the confidence was still there, that corporate poise that never cracked fully. I'll get straight to it, she said. Dad's company is dissolving. The board wants to sell the remaining assets before the debts pile any higher. There's an opportunity for you to acquire what's left. I took a sip of my drink. And why would I want that? She hesitated. Because it's still the Reynolds name. You could restore it. I smiled. No, Emma. I built my own. For the first time, I saw it, a flicker of regret in her eyes. Not guilt exactly, but realization. You really did it, she said softly. You actually made it without us. I nodded. That's what happens when you stop begging for a seat at the table and build your own instead. She looked down. I never thought you'd become this. Neither did Dad, I said. But that's what made it possible. She pushed the folder across the table. Then take it. The company, the name, all of it. End this cycle. I looked at the folder but didn't touch it. No, you keep it. Let it remind you what happens when you build something on lies. She didn't argue, just nodded slowly, stood up, and left without another word. When she was gone, I leaned back and exhaled. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure, quiet, heavy, and final. A week later, ENR Holdings officially filed for bankruptcy. The news barely made headlines, overshadowed by Groundline's newest announcement, a multi-city development partnership that would make us one of the largest independent builders in the region. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just went to the Riverside site one last time. The building stood tall against the skyline, clean lines of steel and glass reflecting the sunset. Workers laughed on their break nearby. It was peaceful, something the Reynolds name had never been. As I stood there, phone buzzing in my pocket with new contracts and calls, I realized the revenge was already complete. Not in lawsuits or headlines, but in silence, in watching everything they built collapse under the weight of their own arrogance. And as the wind brushed across the river, I said quietly, almost to myself, "Enjoy it, Emma. You wanted me gone. Now you finally got your wish." Then I walked away, leaving the ghosts of my old life behind. But even as I did, part of me knew this story wasn't over yet. Because sometimes, when people lose power, they don't vanish, they crawl back. And I had a feeling one of them was about to. It was almost poetic how quietly it all ended. No courtroom battles, no angry confrontations, just the slow, inevitable unraveling of everything they'd once built. Within a month of the bankruptcy filing, my father's company was liquidated. The building that had once been his pride, that glass and steel monument to control, went up for sale. I didn't buy it. I didn't need to. Another developer turned it into office space for a marketing agency. The Reynolds name was stripped off the front in less than a week. I saw it happen by chance. I'd driven by on my way to a Groundline meeting, and there they were, two workers on a ladder, unscrewing the steel letters from the facade. I pulled over and watched from my car. The metal R, the one that used to shine brightest in the morning sun, clattered onto the pavement, leaving a faint outline of where it had been bolted for decades. That sound, that soft metallic thud, felt like the closing note to a symphony that had played for far too long. Dad's health went downhill soon after. The stress, the debt, the public embarrassment, it all caught up. I got a call from Mom one evening telling me he'd been hospitalized after a mild heart attack. Her voice trembled when she said my name. "He keeps asking for you," she whispered. I didn't answer right away. There was a long silence before I finally said, "I hope he gets better," and hung up. For weeks, I didn't go. Part of me wanted to, out of duty or nostalgia or something that still felt unfinished. But every time I thought about it, I remembered the night he looked me in the eye and said I was too emotional to lead. I remembered signing that contract he'd used against me. I remembered Christmas dinner, the laughter, the toast, the humiliation. Then one morning, I got another call. This time, from the hospital itself. "Mr. Reynolds," the nurse said softly, "your father's asking if you'll come see him. He doesn't have much time." I almost said no, but something in her voice, gentle, human, made me pause. So I went. He looked smaller than I remembered. The man who once filled every room with presents now lay surrounded by machines, his voice faint and dry. His eyes flicked toward me when I entered. "You came," he whispered. I did. He nodded weakly, a ghost of his old pride flickering behind tired eyes. "I wanted to fix it," he said slowly. "But I didn't know how." I didn't speak. He took a shallow breath. "I thought power would keep the family together. I didn't realize it was what tore it apart." His hand trembled slightly, reaching toward mine. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then I let him take it. Not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. We didn't say much else. When I left the hospital that night, I knew I wouldn't see him again. And a week later, I didn't. At his funeral, only a small group attended. A few former employees, Mom, and Emma. The casket was simple. The speeches were short. Emma cried through most of it, though I couldn't tell if it was guilt, grief, or both. After the service, she approached me. Her eyes were red, mascara smudged. "I'm selling my apartment," she said quietly. "I can't stay here anymore." I nodded. "Probably for the best." She hesitated. "Do you ever regret how it all ended?" I looked at her, the sister who had once raised a glass to my humiliation, who'd built her career on betrayal, who'd lost everything trying to win a game I stopped playing. "No," I said finally. "I regret not walking away sooner." She stared at me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You really became him, you know." I shook my head. "No, Emma. I became what he could have been, if he'd ever learned to let go." She didn't reply, just turned and walked toward the car waiting at the curb. That was the last time I saw her. Months passed. Groundline grew faster than I could have imagined. We expanded into 3 cities, opened new offices, and built homes that carried my company's name, not out of vanity, but legacy. Real legacy. The kind built on trust, not control. One spring morning, as I walked through the Riverside site, now complete, with families moving in and children playing in the park we'd built, I noticed an old man sitting on a bench nearby, reading a newspaper. For a split second, I saw my father's face in him. Proud, quiet, content. It wasn't him, of course, but the image lingered. I sat down for a moment, watching the sunlight hit the river, and thought about everything that had happened. The pain, the betrayal, the loss. All of it had led me here. Some people spend their lives chasing approval. Others spend it running from failure. I'd done both. But sitting there, surrounded by something I built on my own terms, I realized I'd finally stopped running. When I stood up to leave, a little boy ran past me, holding his mother's hand, laughing. "Mom, look at the buildings," he shouted. "They said the man who made them used to work with his family, but then did it better." His mother smiled. "That's how you build something strong," she said. "You do it right, even when no one believes you can." I smiled faintly and started walking. As I reached the end of the path, the wind from the river picked up, carrying the faint sound of construction from a nearby site. Steel, hammers, progress. The kind of sound my father once lived for. And for the first time, I didn't hear it as noise. I heard it as peace. Because everything they'd taken from me, every betrayal, every cruel word, every dismissal, had only built the foundation for something stronger. In the end, they'd given me exactly what I needed. Freedom. And as I looked back one last time at the river glinting beneath the morning sun, I whispered to the wind, not in anger, not in triumph, but in truth. This time, I built it right. I'm Caleb Hart, 32, the kind of person who keeps grocery receipts for the satisfaction of lining them up by date and watching the numbers make sense. I'm not wealthy, not famous, and not particularly flashy. I own a small bookkeeping practice. I make a steady living, and I like things that add up. That last part matters, because nothing in my family ever adds up, At least not when my older brother Evan is involved. Evan is the type who thinks a handshake is a contract and a promise is a suggestion. He'll swear he'll pay you back Friday, no problem, and then spend Friday sharing a story about a surprise car expense, a surprise pet expense, a surprise life expense that somehow always lands in the envelope marked Caleb's patience. We grew up in the same house. We sat at the same hand-me-down dining table with the same wobbly leg. We learned from the same parents. But if you watched us handle a simple check at a coffee shop, you'd think we were raised by different species. My mother says Evan has a generous heart and a complicated relationship with follow-through. My father, who has a long memory and a quiet way of counting, used to call it exactly what it was, borrowing without the math. Somewhere between my parents' stances, my mother's sympathetic tilt and my father's resigned arithmetic, Evan learned a simple skill. If he framed a debt like a favor, and a favor like family loyalty, the numbers would soften. "Come on, man, it's me," he would say, which apparently was the ultimate coupon code for free. I didn't notice the pattern when I was younger. When Evan forgot his wallet in high school, I was a junior with a fresh driver's license, and it felt like a small, cool thing to cover our burgers. When he borrowed $20 at the gas station and promised to pay me after his night shift, it felt natural. He was working more hours. He would make it right. But there's a peculiar line that generosity crosses when it keeps walking past the point of reason. One summer, he borrowed enough from me. Just until payday, just until this client pays, just until my tax refund clears, that my own rent got tight. He didn't see the late fee I paid, the email from my landlord, the small embarrassment in my stomach. He saw the relief of another. "Thanks, you saved me. I'm good for it," and kept on moving. Thanksgiving has always been our family's anchor. My mother ties an apron around her waist like a superhero cape, and the house smells like butter and cinnamon by dawn. The parade plays on the small kitchen TV. The guest list has remained the same for years. My parents, Evan, me, our cousin Sophia, who is the only person in the family who brings a salad anyone actually finishes, Uncle Rob, who tells the story of the winter of '98, as if we weren't there, and Aunt Marie, who has a way of offering criticism wrapped up like a compliment, shiny ribbon and all. People bring things, pies, bottles, stories. We sit, we clink glasses, we talk across each other. For a few hours every year, it almost works. But for the last few Thanksgivings, something has shifted. There was the year Evan forgot to pick up the turkey he volunteered to buy and walked in carrying a single bag of dinner rolls. There was the time he hinted through the whole meal that his car insurance unexpectedly doubled, and then later forgot his portion of the groceries. My parents spun it as Evans had a streak of bad luck. I called it what my accounting software would, recurring expense. There's a particular memory that keeps walking back to me when I think about this Thanksgiving. It was the year my mother turned 60. We went out for a nice dinner downtown, the kind with a host who knows how to project his voice like a gentle librarian. We ate a beautiful meal, the kind you want to linger over, small plates arriving like thoughtful presents. At the end, the server set down the check folder in the middle of the table, heavy and discreet. I watched Evan's hand hover, then retreat. He lifted his water glass instead and said, "Caleb's been doing well, right, buddy?" It was a joke, but it wasn't. Everyone chuckled in that uncomfortable way people do when someone moves the furniture of a social expectation without warning. I paid that night because it was my mother's birthday and I'm not the son who creates a scene. On the walk to the car, she hugged me, grateful and apologetic. "He means well," she said. I didn't reply. I just folded the receipt into my wallet, numbers down, as if turning the math face first into darkness would change it. This year, in the days leading up to Thanksgiving, my phone buzzed with the usual family chatter. My mother texted me a photo of the pie crusts cooling on the back porch. Uncle Rob asked if anyone remembered whether he was supposed to bring cranberry sauce or the green beans, and then brought both just to be safe. Aunt Marie sent a link to a fun holiday-themed conversation starter deck, which we all ignored. And Evan, 2 days before the holiday, called me with that airy tone he uses when he's hoping a kind wind will push him over a bump. "Hey, little brother," he started. It's always "little brother" when there's a favor in the wings. "Quick question. Could you swing by and pick up dessert on your way? They're holding a pumpkin cheesecake under my name at this bakery on 4th. There was a pause, the sort that is supposed to be too small to notice but still asks for something extra. Evan, I said, carefully, are you asking me to pick it up or to pay for it? He laughed, surprised I'd asked. Come on, just grab it and I'll. He wove around the sentence like it was traffic. Sort it out with you later. There it was again. Later, later, later. I said I'd pick it up. He texted me the order number. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke up early and ran a quick loop around the neighborhood. It was cold enough to make me feel awake, not cold enough to bite. My mind did its usual numbers dance. The cost of the cheesecake, the groceries my mother had already poured herself into, the wine I'd bought, the little line on my budget that said family holidays, like a gentle joke. I took a shower, put on a sweater I reserved for exactly 2 occasions, holidays and meetings with new clients, and drove to the bakery before the line formed. When I gave the clerk the order number, she nodded, disappeared into the back, and returned with a box that looked like it could comfortably house a small cat. That'll be 96, she said. I blinked. I'm not the kind of person who quibbles with dessert prices, but 96 for a pumpkin cheesecake made even my generous heart flip through the mental menu of simpler options. I paid. I could hear Evan's "sort it out later" in my head and decided that later would need a date attached this time. I folded the receipt into my wallet, numbers up. By late afternoon, my parents' house hummed like a friendly machine. The radiator clicked and sighed. The oven door opened and closed with the rhythm of a heartbeat, and the dog wove around our legs like a soft, persistent rumor. My mother fussed over the seating arrangement while pretending not to fuss. I'm not fussy, she said, moving place cards by a hair. I'm thoughtful. Evan arrived with dramatic timing, 10 minutes later than promised and 15 earlier than rude, enough to be noticed, but not enough to complain about without seeming petty. He walked in carrying a bottle of something whose price tag suggested he'd won a gift basket at an office raffle. He kissed my mother on the cheek, clapped my father on the shoulder, and held his arms out toward me like a quarterback celebrating a last-minute touchdown. There he is, he said. My guy, you get the cheesecake? I lifted the box and set it on the counter. I did, I said. We'll settle up later. He smiled, easy and bright. Of course, he said, as if the topic were a balloon he could tie to a chair and forget. Sophia arrived with her salad, a colorful tangle that even Uncle Rob devours like he's discovered vegetables for the first time. The house expanded around the noise, the smell, the soft traffic of people crossing the same patch of tile and apologizing for it. It felt almost normal. That's what made what followed feel like stepping into an echo you forgot you created. We sat down. My father lifted his glass for the opening toast, a simple thank you for health and food and the miracle of my mother's pies. Then Evan, as if his hand had been tugged by a string, stood up with his glass and grinned. Before we dig in, he said, I just want to say something. There's a particular pitch his voice takes on when he's about to charm his way into a favor. It's warm without heat, soft without weight. He looked around the table with a theatrical pause, the kind of pause that invites people to lean in. Caleb's got this, he said, smile widening. Right, buddy? You'll cover dinner. It was a simple sentence, but it didn't belong in that room. People don't cover dinner at a family Thanksgiving that my mother had been preparing since the leaves were still green. We hadn't gone out to a restaurant. No server would set a leather folder between the salt and the pepper. We were in our childhood home with the nick in the table that looks like a little crescent moon. But I understood immediately that Evan wasn't speaking literally. He was speaking in that code he's perfected. Caleb will cover what needs covering: groceries, dessert, wine, the last-minute thing, the intangibles, and we'll all smile like this is how families show love. For years, my response would have been the path of least friction, a laugh, a wave of the hand, a don't worry about it, and then an internal promise to revise my budget. But lately, the math has been louder than the mood. I felt the old habit lift and hover above me like a coat I no longer needed to wear. I set my glass down. The room did that subtle shift where everyone becomes aware that something unscripted is about to happen. My mother's hands fluttered near her napkin. My father watched me, eyes steady. Sophia glanced between us, curious. I smiled calm. No, I said. It wasn't sharp or dramatic. It was simply a word that shows up when you put it on your calendar and give it a date. Evan laughed like I'd made a joke. Come on, he said, don't be a hero. I kept my voice even. I'm not covering anything that you volunteered for, I said. If you wanted to bring dessert, Fantastic. If you wanted me to pick it up, that's fine. But we'll settle up. And I'm not playing the part you've written for me at these dinners anymore. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a speech. I just told the truth, and it sat there like something heavy and honest in the middle of the table. For a second, I saw something like surprise flicker across his face, followed by that old practiced ease. He lifted his glass again, this time shrugging. All right, he said. Don't make it weird. Let's eat. The table exhaled. My mother poured gravy with an extra tilt of concentration. The dog snored in the corner. And yet, even with my small no resting between us, I felt something new opening inside me, a place where my own needs didn't have to apologize for existing. Through the first course, Evan was quieter than usual. He made a show of complimenting the turkey, of asking Sophia about her new job, of laughing a little too hard at Uncle Rob's story. But I could feel his attention circling back to me like a searchlight. He asked about my business with the same overly bright interest you hear when someone scans a menu they can't afford. So, big year? Taking on new clients? I nodded, non-committal. Steady, I said. Good. He pushed a little more. Still working with that restaurant group? The one with the wine bar. I met his eyes and smiled. Some of them, I said, and stabbed a piece of green bean like it owed me money. After dinner, as the dishes shifted to the kitchen and everyone pretended not to keep eating while they cleaned, Evan cornered me near the sink with the kind of casual posture that wasn't casual. About the cheesecake, he said. You know I'll take care of it. I flicked the faucet off and handed him the receipt, folded. Perfect, I said. He tucked it into his pocket like a magician slipping a card up his sleeve. Then he clapped my shoulder. You know you're my guy, he said, the words both affectionate and calculated, and walked away. I would love to say I didn't think about it again that night, but that would be a lie. I thought about it while I packed leftovers into containers and labeled them with a marker. I thought about it while we stood in the doorway saying goodbye 3 times, the way families do when none of the words are the actual words they want to say. I thought about it as I drove home with the radio low, the city quiet in that holiday way, the streets wide and emptied like a stage after the curtain falls. I couldn't tell if I was proud of myself for saying no, or if I'd only managed to kick the can down a different road. Still, I slept better than I expected. The next morning, the house was gentle and still. I made coffee and watched the steam rise, that small domestic theater that makes you feel like you're doing something important. I had plans, a walk, calls with 2 clients who delayed invoicing until after the holiday, maybe a movie if I could convince myself to sit still long enough. I just sat down at my kitchen table, the one without a nick, the one I'd bought secondhand but sanded myself, when my phone buzzed. Evan, of course. Morning, little brother, he said when I answered, cheerful like a man who's already decided the day will be kind to him. Got a sec? Thought I'd swing by. I've got something for you. He said the last part as if he were delivering a trophy and not, say, a folded piece of thermal paper. Sure, I said. I'm home. He was outside 12 minutes later, which meant he'd been on his way before he called. He walked in without waiting for me to say come in, which is a small thing and a big thing at the same time. He looked around. Place looks good, he said, like he was doing me a favor by noticing. He didn't sit. He set a paper down on the table between us with the drama of a dealer placing a winning card. I swung by the bakery, he said, just to confirm everything for my records. He said it like someone who has records, the word puffed up with importance. He tapped the receipt with his finger. Boy, he said, chuckling, they really get you this time of year. He was smiling, but he hadn't looked at me yet. He was looking at the numbers. That's when I saw it. The way his expression changed, like a string pulled from too tight to slack in one movement. His smile lowered slightly, not quite a frown but something like it. He reread the receipt, lips moving. His hands, which are never still, went still. He swallowed. He set the paper down carefully, almost tenderly, as if it might break. Caleb, he said, and there was something new in his voice, a note that made the air thinner. He broke off, eyes flicking to the top of the receipt and then back to me, like he was triangulating a location. He took a breath like a swimmer coming up for air and glanced toward my living room, toward my bookshelf with its framed photos and tidy rows, toward the small, ordinary life I've built, as if he were seeing it for the first time. He tapped the paper again. He started, shaking his head slowly, and then tried again, softer now. You didn't tell me you. I leaned back in my chair, coffee cooling at my elbow, the morning waiting. For the first time in a long time, I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it expand between us, patient and calm, the kind of silence that asks a person to choose a side of themselves and step onto it. Evan's fingers tightened on the edge of the receipt. His hands, steady a moment ago, began to tremble in the smallest, unmistakable way. I didn't say anything. I just watched Evan stare at the bakery receipt like it had turned into a mirror and shown him something he didn't want to see. His thumb rubbed the paper so hard the ink began to blur under the heat of his skin. He tried to put the smile back on, the one he uses as a bridge to get across awkward moments without ever touching the water, but it kept slipping. He cleared his throat and picked up the paper again, like maybe a second look would rearrange the numbers into a friendlier shape. "You okay?" I asked, gentle, because I know him well enough to know you don't push when he's wobbling. He nodded too fast. Yeah, sure." He slid the receipt toward me like it was a hot plate he needed to get rid of. I'll Venmo you later. Got a bank transfer pending." The sentence was a familiar road he'd driven 100 times, but he drove it like his hands weren't on the wheel. Then he hugged me. Quick, one-armed, perfunctory, and left as abruptly as he came, shoulders a little tighter, head a little lower. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. "Did Evan swing by?" 3 dots appeared before I could answer. "He said he did." I typed back that he had. Before I hit send, I watched 3 more dots bloom and fade. "He's sensitive lately," she wrote. "Be kind." There it was, the family thermostat turning itself down the moment Evan generated heat. Everyone else expected to put on a sweater and smile. By noon, the afterglow of Thanksgiving had drained out of the group chat and been replaced by photos, inside jokes, and small edits of history. Aunt Marie posted a filtered shot of the table, edges softened, reality smoothed, captioned, "What a perfect evening." Uncle Rob sent a blurry picture of the dog wearing a paper napkin like a cape. Sophia shared a clip of Evan carving the turkey with a flourish that made it look like he'd contributed more than volume. Then Evan chimed in. "Next year, dinner on me." A winking emoji. The same lie as always, dressed like a promise. I didn't respond. My father sent a thumbs-up reaction, which in our family is the equivalent of a notarized statement that he noticed the message and decided not to fight with it. In the afternoon, I took a walk and tried to let the cold sort my thoughts into boxes. The cheesecake, the receipt, the way Evan's hands had started to shake just a little, the way my mother's text had landed like an instruction manual for holding my tongue. When I got back, my phone had 5 missed calls. 2 from unknown numbers, 1 from Evan, 1 from my mother, 1 from private. I set the phone down. I made tea. The 6th call came while the kettle was still humming. I answered. "Caleb," my mother said without hello, which is how I knew she'd been on the phone with Evan first. "Your brother he's feeling he had a difficult morning." I could hear dishes clinking in the background, her voice pitched somewhere between worry and performance. "He says you confronted him?" I closed my eyes and pictured the way my mother stood when she was trying to turn a question into a scolding without changing any of the words. "No," I said, calm. "He stopped by." I gave him the receipt. Silence stretched. "It was expensive," she offered, a test balloon. $96 is a lot for a cake." I let out a breath. "It is," I said. "It wasn't just the price." I stopped myself before I stepped over a line I wasn't ready to cross. "We agreed he'd settle up." My mother's voice softened, sugar added to a stew. "You know how he is with details. In our house, details was our family's way of describing anything with a due date, a bill, a boundary. He's not careless," I said. "He's careful in the wrong direction." She exhaled like I'd said something uncharitable about a person she loved, which I had, because it was true. "Just be patient," she said. "He said he'd come by tomorrow. Maybe you two can talk like brothers. Not like accountants." The last word came out like she was chewing on a lemon seed. "We'll talk," I said. "Love you." "Love you too," she replied, a little too quickly, as if love were a full stop. An hour later, Evan texted, "We good." A minute after that, "Can we do Sunday brunch?" My treat. The words, my treat, squinted at me like they couldn't handle the light. I said yes, not because I believed him, but because I'd learned that sometimes you let the play run long enough for the audience to understand the plot without you narrating it. On Sunday, The brunch place was the kind of spot with plants hanging from the ceiling and mugs that looked handmade. The hostess smiled in a way that suggested she could tell the difference between families who solved their arguments in the parking lot and ones who saved them for the table. Evan arrived wearing a jacket that could have either been expensive or just clean. He's good at purchasing the version of something that makes people think he's the version of himself he wants to be. He hugged me like nothing had happened and sat down like the apology had been pre-signed and notarized. We ordered. He talked. He has a fluent language for small triumphs that don't require verification. A client who loved his pitch, a big thing around the corner, a deal on the table. All of it bright words stretched over an empty frame. I listened and nodded, and when the server dropped the check with delicate end-of-scene timing, I watched Evan reach for it. My heart did a small, involuntary tilt of surprise. He opened it. He looked. Got it, he said aloud, like a person congratulating himself for being the person he wants to be. Then he patted his back pocket. Then his jacket. The performance was so well rehearsed I could have choreographed it with him, beat for beat. Oh, he said, frowning as if the universe had just wronged him. I must have left my card in my other jacket. He looked up with that sheepish charm people once found disarming. You mind? My stomach did that small empty fall it has learned to recognize. The server stood nearby in polite limbo, holding a pen, watching the script she's seen 100 times play out. I reached into my wallet, set my card down on the tray, and kept my voice level. I'll get this, I said, and you can send me your half today. He smiled too broadly. Absolutely. He tapped the table twice like a judge's gavel concluding the ceremony. We stood, put on our coats, and stepped into the cold. On the sidewalk, he clapped my shoulder and said, "You're a lifesaver." It came out automatic, old, unexamined. You can send it now, I said, not unkind, but with the precision of a person who has decided the new rule needs to be written in ink. Sure, he said, reaching for his phone. He scrolled, tapped, then paused theatrically. Ugh, my bank's text verification isn't coming through. Must be my service. He looked at his screen like it had betrayed him. I'll do it when I get home. Promise. I nodded. I didn't push. I had stopped pushing because I had started recording. By the time I returned home, I had 2 more missed calls, my mother and Aunt Marie. Aunt Marie left a voicemail that started cheerful and ended nosy. Sweetie, was brunch good? Evan said you two had such a nice time. A pause. He also mentioned you've been keeping track of things. With numbers. The word numbers again, like it was a personality defect. We don't want to make everything transactional, she added. Family isn't a ledger. I stared at my wall for a moment and let the sentence sit next to the stack of payment reminders I draft for strangers who appreciate precision. That night, my father called. He doesn't call often without purpose. Walk with me, he said, which is his way of asking for a conversation that doesn't have to look like one. We looped the block twice, breath visible in the air. It's not that you're wrong, he said finally. It's that we've let it be this way so long that any correction feels unkind. I knew what he meant. Families fossilize around their bad habits. Prying them apart feels like breaking bone even when you're doing a surgery. I don't want to fight, I said. I want a pattern to end. He nodded. Patterns end when people are ready to see them. We walked in silence. Our steps matched. Before we parted, he touched my shoulder. If you need me, he said, I'm here. It was the closest my father comes to saying, I see what you see. Monday morning, Evan's promised transfer hadn't appeared. No brunch money. No cheesecake money. No message. I sent him a calm text with both totals and the receipts attached, friendly as a weather report. Hey, here's the amount from brunch yesterday and the cheesecake from Thursday. 96 plus 28.50 is equal to 124.50. Please send today. He replied with a thumbs up. Late afternoon, he sent a screenshot of his banking app, processing. The timestamp was cropped halfway. I didn't reply. I set a reminder to follow up in 24 hours. That small decision, to treat this like a normal bill, not a family favor, must have triggered an alarm in the system of our family because my mother called within the hour. Sweetie, she began, the voice she uses when she's trying to wrap me in a blanket before taking the blanket away. Do you need the money right now? Because if this is tight for you, Dad and I cut her off gently. I'm fine. This isn't about tight. It's about right. The line went quiet. Okay, she said after a moment. I don't like tension. That made me smile despite myself. You love tension, I said, as long as it's polite. She sighed, but she laughed, too, because she knows I'm not wrong. Please don't be hard on him, she added, small and soft. He's had a lot of stressors. I thought of the jacket, the brunch, the screenshots cropped at the edges. We all have, I said. By Wednesday, Evan had transformed my reminders into my fault. He texted, "Not a great week to lean on me." I stared at the words. Lean on me. The inversion sat heavy in my chest. I typed, erased, typed again, then settled on, "I'm not leaning on you. I'm asking you to fulfill your word." He replied with the digital equivalent of a shrug. "You're being intense." Another message. "Mom says you're turning into dad." The implication was clear. Dad, with his budgets and his schedules and his quiet disapproval of chaos. In our family mythology, Mom is warmth and Dad is winter. The irony, Dad is the only reason the house stayed warm. Thursday evening, Sophia FaceTimed me. She doesn't pick sides, she picks truth. "He called me," she said, eyes tired, hair up. "He's spiraling a little. Says you ambushed him, showed him something at your place." I rubbed my temple. I showed him a receipt. She tilted her head. "That's not the part he's spiraling about." My chest went still. "What part then?" She hesitated, weighing loyalty against accuracy. "He said it had information on it. Something he didn't expect to see. He wouldn't say what, but he sounded spooked." I was quiet long enough that she filled the space. "Look, I love him, but he's been living in a house where every mirror is flattering. He saw a real one, and now he's mad at the mirror." I exhaled. "That sounds right." She leaned in, softening. "Whatever you're doing, do it carefully. People who are used to getting away with things don't go quiet when you set a boundary. They get louder." Evan did get louder, just not to me. He posted a cryptic status on social media about loyalty not being a spreadsheet. Cousins liked it. Aunt Marie commented a string of hearts and prayer hands. A friend of his chimed in with "always there for you, bro." I didn't reply. I didn't defend myself in a comment section built for slogans. I kept saving receipts. Friday, he called with a new idea. "Let's make it simple," he said, salesman smooth. "I'll bring you cash. We'll square up the cheesecake and brunch in a few of the old times. And then we're clean." Old times. The phrase was a hallway he hoped I'd walk down and get lost in. "Okay," I said. Sunday afternoon. He agreed too quickly. "Perfect. I'll be there at 2. Sunday arrived frosted and bright. I spent the morning straightening the apartment the way you do when you're trying to organize your thoughts by organizing your books. At 1:58, my phone buzzed. Parking now. At 2:07, another. Be right up. At 2:22, the knock. He came in wearing that cologne he wears when he wants to smell like a good decision. He had cash in his hand, folded once, a small, thick rectangle. He set it on the table like a peace offering. "There," he said, proud. "See? Not a big deal." The way he said it made it smaller, on purpose. I counted it. It was exactly $100. I waited. He waited too, smiling, as if the rest of the money were hiding under the table waiting to surprise us. "It's $124.50, I said, "plus the older amounts you mentioned." His smile tightened. Right. I figured we'd start here," and he dusted his hands of the parts he didn't want to articulate. "And keep it light." He tried to push the cash across the table with 2 fingers like it would grow under my hands. "Evan," I said, quiet but firm, "we're not keeping it light. We're keeping it accurate." He huffed a laugh that didn't sound like laughter. "You really are turning into dad." He sat back, thinking, then leaned forward suddenly, elbows on knees, eyes narrow. "You know what the real problem is? You've started making me look bad." The sentence should have been a joke, but it wasn't. "I used to be able to count on you to be easy," he said. "Now you're different." He gestured around my apartment like it contained the answer. "Is it because you've got your little business? Because you think you're above me now?" I blinked. "No," I said. "It's because I've started treating myself like someone I know." He rolled his eyes so hard I thought they'd ache later. He stood, pacing. "You know, it's funny," he said, not sounding amused. "I went back to that bakery, just to, line things up. And I saw something on that receipt that didn't make sense at first." He stopped pacing, looked at me, and smiled in a way that wasn't warm. "Do you know what I'm talking about?" He wanted a reaction. I worked very hard not to give him one. "It's a receipt," I said. "What could be confusing?" He chuckled to himself, a private joke. Yeah, he said softly. What could be confusing? He tapped the table twice, then pressed his hands flat on it and leaned down. You should be careful, little brother, he said, almost affectionate and not at all. Sometimes numbers tell stories people don't want told. The way he said it made the room tilt, just a degree. A breeze of something colder passed through us. I felt the old family instinct rise in me. Smooth it over. Make it nice. Pretend the knife is a spoon. I didn't. I sat very still and let him feel the weight of someone who wasn't going to rush in and rescue him from a mess he'd kicked over himself. He straightened, fished his phone from his pocket, and shot a photo of the cash on the table like he needed proof he'd been generous. I'll bring the rest tomorrow, he said. Maybe I'll bring Mom too. She misses you. The last part was a dart wrapped in lace. After he left, I sat at the table with the stack of receipts, groceries I'd covered, event tickets I'd bought in the old days, a dog grooming bill he'd spot me till Friday for 3 summers ago, laid out like a paper city. I wasn't angry as much as I was awake. It's a strange feeling when you realize that the fog you've been living inside isn't weather, it's a habit. I texted Sophia. He came by, brought cash, said something weird about the receipt. She wrote back immediately, define weird. I typed, deleted, typed again. He hinted it shows something. Wouldn't say what. 3 dots thrummed on the screen. Do you want me to ask him? She wrote. I hesitated. Not yet. Monday afternoon, my mother texted. Can we come by tonight? Dad too. All of you. I replied. Yes, she wrote. Evan said we should all sit down and clear the air. Clear the air, in our family, often meant opening a window and pretending the smoke wasn't coming from the stove. 7. I wrote. I'll order coffee. We'll bring pie, she replied, as if sugar could staple a conversation together. At 6:58, I heard their voices in the hall, my mother's anxious patter, my father's low murmur, Evan's bright commentary. They filed in like a committee visiting a site. My mother put a pie on the counter as if she were baptizing the room. My father shook my hand with that quiet pressure that says I'm here even when I'm not speaking. Evan moved like a director placing actors on a stage. We sat. The pie remained untouched. The air was polite and thick. Caleb, my mother began, hands folded. We're here because we all love each other and we don't want unpleasantness. Evan nodded solemnly, like a man presiding over a meeting he had graciously agreed to attend. My father watched me. He does that when he wants me to know I'm allowed to hold my ground. This feels like a lot of ceremony for a cheesecake, I said, half smile to keep the temperature down. It's not about the cheesecake, Evan said quickly, leaning forward. It's about transparency. He said the word like he'd just learned it. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a folded paper, and placed it on the table between us, slowly, deliberately, like it was Exhibit A. It's about what's on that receipt, he said, eyes on me, voice suddenly calm in a way that felt practiced. And how it changes things. He tapped the paper with one finger. His hand was steady now. Mine wasn't. I looked at my father. He was very still, the way someone is when they know a wave is about to hit, and they're trying to measure its height before it does. I reached for the paper. My fingers brushed the edge. Evan's smile widened by a fraction, like a person who had been waiting hours to open a door and had finally heard the key slide into the lock. And right there, hand on the edge of whatever story he thought he was about to tell with my numbers, I stopped. Evan's folded paper sat between us like a lit fuse. My mother's hands fluttered near her lap, not touching the table, as if she wanted to reach out and smooth the whole scene down, but knew better than to touch it yet. My father didn't move. He just watched, eyes narrowed the way they get when he's measuring something invisible. I slid the paper toward me, unfolded it, and felt my stomach go hollow. It wasn't just the bakery receipt. It was the bakery receipt stapled to a photocopy of my bank statement, my private bank statement. I froze, staring at the columns of numbers, the logo of my bank at the top, the neat listing of deposits and balances. I knew instantly what Evan had seen, what had made his hand shake the first time. He had spotted the line that didn't belong in his version of me, the wire transfer from a client that was more than he had made in an entire year. 6 figures, clean and simple. It was there in black and white, and he had stapled it to a receipt like it was Exhibit A in a case against me. Where did you get this? I asked, voice low, careful. My throat felt dry, the words scraped out of me. My mother shifted uncomfortably. Evan said you showed him. No. I cut in, sharper than I meant to. I didn't show him this. Evan leaned back in his chair, arms spread like a man settling into a throne. You left it out, he said smoothly. On the table. When you gave me the cheesecake receipt. You didn't think I'd notice? You've been sitting here acting like Mr. Responsible, Mr. Ledger Book, but all this time, he tapped the numbers with the tip of his finger. You've been hiding money. Serious money. From us. I blinked at him, heat rising in my chest. From you. I said slowly. Why would my earnings be something I owe you? My mother gasped softly. My father stayed silent. But Evan leaned forward, his eyes bright with something ugly. Because you let us believe you were just scraping by. You let Mom cover things. You let me carry the narrative that you were the frugal little brother. But here, he pushed the paper closer, almost triumphant. Here's the truth. You've got plenty. You've been sitting on it he stumbled just a little, but caught himself, while we thought you were one of us. One of us, I repeated, voice cold now. You mean someone you could lean on and never pay back? Someone you could manipulate with pity? His smile slipped for the first time. Don't twist it. You think this makes you better? You think having money means you get to treat family like clients? He looked at my mother, searching for backup. You see this, right? He's been lying. Keeping secrets. My mother's voice trembled. Caleb, why didn't you tell us? Her eyes weren't angry, just wounded, confused. That hurt more than Evan's accusations. I didn't tell you, I said, trying to steady my voice, because it's mine, because I've worked for it, and because the moment Evan saw a number he didn't like, I knew he'd turn it into this. I gestured at the paper. Evan scoffed, leaning back again, but his hands were tight fists on his knees. You think you can sit there and play victim? You've been hoarding while this family struggled. You mean while you kept borrowing and never paying back? I shot back. You're not entitled to my bank account, Evan. The silence that followed was suffocating. My father finally spoke, his voice deep and steady. You had no right to dig into his finances. His gaze locked on Evan, and for once my brother didn't meet his eyes. But instead of backing down, Evan shifted, angry energy crackling off him. No right. Or no right to notice what he's been hiding. He's not the saint you all make him out to be. He's been sitting on a fortune and letting us all believe he was just normal. The word normal landed like an insult. My mother's lips pressed together. My father's jaw worked, tight. And me. I sat there with my own bank statement on the table, exposed, my brother grinning like he'd finally found the lever that would tilt the whole family in his direction. And then Evan said the line that changed everything. He leaned in, dropped his voice, and said, You know what, Caleb? Maybe if you'd just shared, maybe if you'd actually acted like family, I wouldn't have had to show them. But now, he looked around the table, meeting every pair of eyes but mine. Now everyone knows the truth. He's been holding out on us. That was the moment. The betrayal wasn't just the paper, or the invasion, or the exposure. It was the way he said us. He had drawn a line across the table, left me on one side, and tried to pull my own parents to his. He wasn't just coming for my money. He was coming for my place in my own family. And in the silence that followed, as the words settled and the room turned heavy, I felt something shift inside me. Something that had been patient, forgiving, always making excuses. Something that, in that moment, finally broke. I didn't speak. Not yet. I just sat back, stared at my brother, and let him think, for one dangerous heartbeat, that maybe he had won. And that's exactly when the air in the room changed. My brother sat there with my bank statement like he'd unearthed buried treasure, smug in the glow of his own betrayal, while my parents' silence stretched longer and longer across the table. My mother looked at me with that wounded expression I've only ever seen when she's convinced someone has betrayed the idea of family first. My father's gaze flicked between us, jaw tight, but he didn't speak. And me, I felt like the ground under my chair had shifted. The numbers on that paper weren't just numbers anymore. They were the wedge Evan had driven between me and the people I had worked hardest to respect. It was a strange, hollow kind of pain. Not rage, not even humiliation, just this deep ache of recognition that my brother had finally crossed a line he couldn't uncross. He hadn't just borrowed without paying back. He hadn't just leaned on me, manipulated me, or pulled me into his endless theater of excuses. He had reached into my private life, stripped it bare, and then weaponized it in front of the people whose opinions still carried weight in my chest. He'd made me look like the dishonest one. I should have shouted, slammed my fist on the table, demanded the truth of how he even got hold of my bank statement in the first place. But all I did was sit there. My silence, I realized, was louder than anything I could have said. My mother mistook that silence for guilt. She turned to me, eyes watery, voice soft like she was already bracing for my apology. "Why didn't you tell us, Caleb? Why hide it? We're your family." The way she said it, hide it, like I'd been scheming instead of surviving, saving, working. My throat closed. "I didn't hide anything," I said quietly, but the words fell flat. My father's lips twitched like he wanted to say something, but then his hand settled on the armrest and stayed there. It felt like being abandoned in slow motion. Evan seized the silence like a lifeline. See? He can't even defend himself. He knows it's wrong. He leaned back, eyes scanning the room as if expecting applause. All this time, he let us believe he was just scraping by. Meanwhile, he's sitting on what was it? 200 grand? 3. He looked right at me, smirking, daring me to correct him. And he didn't say a word. Not to Mom, not to Dad, not even to me. Some brother. It was a masterstroke of manipulation. He didn't just accuse me of selfishness. He reframed my hard work as secrecy, my privacy as betrayal. And in that moment, I realized it was working. My mother's shoulders slumped like she'd been tricked. My father's face, unreadable, was worse because I couldn't tell if he was angry at Evan or disappointed in me. The conversation after that wasn't really a conversation. It was Evan talking, weaving his story, and me absorbing the blows without raising a hand. He spoke about the times he covered for me, when I was younger, small, ancient favors he inflated into debts I had never acknowledged. He painted a picture of himself as the struggling, honest brother, contrasted against the one who had hidden success. He even had the nerve to call me calculating. And as much as my father finally interjected here and there, "That's enough, Evan," or "Don't twist this," the damage had already been done. The seed of doubt had been planted. When the meeting finally ended, my parents left with the pie untouched. My mother hugged me, but it was hesitant, heavy, her cheek cold against mine. "We'll talk later," she whispered. My father just pressed my shoulder and left. And Evan? He smirked on his way out the door, leaning in to murmur, so only I could hear, "Guess we're even now, little brother." Even. The word rattled around in my skull as the door closed. Even, like exposing me and twisting my family's view of me, somehow balanced out decades of his debts, his manipulation, his parasitic habits. Even, like we were back at zero. That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by the same receipts I'd laid out before, but now they looked different. They didn't look like proof anymore. They looked like clutter. Evan had taken the one thing I prided myself on, order, honesty, precision, and made it look dirty. And worse, my family had half believed him. For the first time in years, I felt small again. Small, like the kid who used to cover for his older brother's mistakes, who used to smooth things over so Mom wouldn't cry, who used to keep quiet so Dad wouldn't explode. That kid had grown up into a man who thought he'd built something strong enough to withstand all that. But sitting there in the silence of my apartment, I realized how fragile it still was. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Evan's voice again, repeating those words. "You've been hiding it. He's been holding out on us." By morning, I'd made a decision. Not a loud one, not even a fully formed one, but a quiet, stubborn one. I wasn't going to let Evan define me. Not to my parents, not to Sophia, not to anyone else. I wasn't going to let this betrayal be the last word. I started small. I pulled out a fresh notebook, the kind I usually reserved for new clients, and wrote at the top of the first page, "What Evan owes." Beneath it, I listed every loan, every dinner, every "I'll get you later," every penny I could prove. Then I flipped the page and wrote, "What he's taken: privacy, trust, reputation, family peace." I didn't know what the plan was yet, but I knew this. The math had to balance eventually. Still, the days that followed were heavy. Calls from my mother felt shorter, clipped, polite. My father texted once, a simple "hope you're okay," with no follow-up. And Evan? He went quiet, which was worse than noise. It meant he was building something. I walked around in those days like a ghost, half present, half consumed by the echo of what had happened. My work suffered. I stared at spreadsheets until the numbers blurred. My sleep broke into fragments. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined my mother's expression when Evan said, "He's been hiding money." That was my rock bottom. Not the betrayal itself, but the realization that it had worked. That for the first time, my family believed him more than me. And yet, even in that hollow place, I felt something begin to shift. Something that wasn't forgiveness, wasn't surrender, wasn't resignation. Something sharper, colder. I didn't know it yet, but Evan's betrayal had given me something I hadn't had in years. A reason to stop just surviving his games. A reason to plan. And I started to. Quietly. Patiently. In the dark. The weeks after that meeting were heavy in a way I can only describe as quiet grief. Not the kind you cry out loud about, but the kind that makes you question whether the floor under your feet will ever feel steady again. My mother's voice on the phone was cooler, my father's text shorter, and Evan's silence hung over everything like a storm cloud waiting for the right wind. For a while, I carried it all on my shoulders. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, life began to tilt in a new direction. At first, I buried myself in work, not to escape, but to prove to myself that Evan's story didn't define me. My bookkeeping practice, which had always been steady, began to flourish in a way I hadn't anticipated. A restaurant group I'd been courting for months finally signed on, and within 2 weeks, they referred me to 2 of their partners. 1 contract turned into 3. 3 turned into 7. Suddenly, my phone was ringing more than I could answer, my inbox filled with clients who weren't just paying me on time. They were thanking me for the peace of mind I brought them. It felt surreal. For years, I'd been the family's quiet problem solver, the one who smoothed edges and kept things running without recognition. Now, for the first time, strangers were telling me outright, "You're good at this. You make things easier. You matter." The validation didn't erase the betrayal, but it began to stack up, brick by brick, into something that looked like confidence. With the extra income, I started doing things I'd put off for years. I upgraded my office from a cramped corner in my apartment to a shared workspace downtown with big windows that let in the morning light. I hired an assistant, just part-time at first, to handle scheduling and client calls. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving my work. I was building something. A business that wasn't fragile, wasn't secret, wasn't dependent on anyone's permission. My personal life began to stretch out too. I joined a local running group, something I'd always said I was too busy for. I reconnected with Sophia outside of the family gatherings, and she became one of my fiercest supporters. Over coffee one afternoon, she said, "You know, you've always been the steady one. You just forgot to be steady for yourself." The words hit me hard, because she was right. I had spent years giving stability to people who thrived on chaos, and now I was finally turning that energy inward. The strangest part? The more I grew, the less Evan's voice echoed in my head. At first, I thought of him constantly, his smirk, his accusation, the way he set us and left me on the other side. But as weeks turned into months, his grip on my thoughts loosened. Not gone, not forgiven, but quieter, duller, like a scar that no longer throbs, only itches when the weather changes. But power has a way of making itself visible, even when you don't announce it. My parents began to notice. My mother called one evening, her tone hesitant but curious. "Your father mentioned your business is doing well?" she asked, as if the question itself was dangerous. I told her the truth, that it was thriving, that I was busier than I'd ever been, that I was even thinking of hiring another assistant. There was a long pause. "I'm proud of you," she said finally. And though the words were simple, they carried the weight of someone beginning to see me outside of Evan's shadow. My father, more subtle, showed his acknowledgement in his own way. One Saturday, he asked if I'd look over his retirement accounts, something he'd never trusted anyone else with. "I want your eyes on it," he said. Just that. But it meant more than an entire speech. Meanwhile, Evan's silence had stretched on. He wasn't calling, wasn't showing up, wasn't pulling his usual stunts. At first, I thought it meant he was lying in wait, planning another ambush. But then I started hearing whispers. Sophia mentioned he'd asked her for money. A cousin let slip that he'd posted about bad luck with his business venture. And then, one day, my mother called and her voice cracked in a way that told me the truth without her saying it. "He's been struggling," she admitted. "Things haven't been easy." I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Because by then, my life had already begun to rise on its own. The more Evan stumbled, the more I realized I no longer needed his validation, or even my parents, to define my worth. I was standing taller, not because I'd beaten him, but because I had finally stopped letting him dictate the terms of my life. But the real turning point came quietly, in the form of an invitation. A client whose books I'd cleaned up so thoroughly they called me a magician with spreadsheets, asked if I would speak at a small business seminar about financial management. At first, I laughed, me, standing in front of a room, giving advice. But I said yes. And when I stood there that day, talking about numbers and order and responsibility, I saw people nodding, taking notes, hanging on my words. For the first time, my voice wasn't just something Evan mocked or twisted. It was something people respected. I walked out of that seminar with a new understanding. Power isn't always about who talks the loudest at the dinner table. Sometimes, it's about who builds quietly until their foundation is so strong, no one can knock it down. And yet, just as my life was beginning to bloom, Evan found a way to reappear. Not through a phone call, not through a family dinner, but through something far more dangerous. Something that told me his silence hadn't been surrender, it had been preparation. Because one evening, as I was closing up my office, I found an envelope slipped under my door. My name written across the front in Evan's unmistakable handwriting. Inside, a single sheet of paper. And what was written there made me realize the real storm hadn't even begun. The envelope was thin, almost weightless, but my pulse quickened as I unfolded the paper inside. It wasn't just a letter, it was a photocopy of another bank record, only this time it wasn't mine. It was Evan's. The numbers told a story louder than any speech he could have made. Overdrafts piling up, credit card balances bleeding into 5 figures, late fees stacked like bricks. His signature, scrawled at the bottom of one page, proved it was real. For a moment, I just sat there, the fluorescent hum of my office lights filling the silence. He had delivered this himself. That was what unsettled me. Evan, who had weaponized my private numbers against me, had now left his own dirty laundry at my door. At first, I thought it was a mistake. But no, Evan wasn't careless like that. He was dramatic. He wanted me to see it. He wanted me to know he was drowning. And in his twisted way, maybe he thought it was leverage. A cry for help disguised as a dare. I tucked the papers into a folder, locked them in my desk, and left the office that night with a weight I hadn't felt before. Because information was power, and for once, the ledger wasn't tilted in his favor. The next week only reinforced that shift. My business kept growing. A new client, a mid-sized construction company, asked me to manage a full audit of their financials. It was grueling work, but the kind of work that put my name in rooms I'd never been in before. Suddenly, other companies in the city, larger, more influential, were reaching out. One lunch with a CEO turned into an invitation to join a professional network. Within a month, I had more influence than I'd ever dreamed possible. Not influence like Evan craved, flashy cars, borrowed charm, quick wins, but the kind that was steady, practical, rooted in trust. It was around then that Sophia dropped a piece of information into my lap like it was casual gossip. We were sitting in a cafe, her stirring tea absent-mindedly, when she said, "You know Evan's been talking to Mom about asking you for an investment, right?" I froze. Investment? She nodded, not looking up. He's been spinning some story about a startup idea. Wants to make it sound legit. Says if you really cared about family, you'd back him. She finally glanced at me, eyes apologetic. Mom almost believes him. Dad doesn't. I leaned back in my chair, the noise of the cafe fading into a dull buzz. That's when it clicked. The envelope hadn't been a mistake. It was groundwork. Evan was trying to position himself as desperate but visionary, the struggling genius who just needed one good break. He thought if I saw his debts, I'd panic, feel guilty, and step in. He wanted me to play the role of savior again. But what he hadn't counted on was that I was no longer the same Caleb. I had the receipts, literally. His financial chaos was laid out in black and white. I knew how deep the hole was. And now, with my growing reputation, I also had something else, the ability to expose him if I chose. If he tried to corner me with his startup pitch, I could dismantle it piece by piece, with evidence no one could argue against. That night, I spread Evan's bank records across my desk alongside the folder of my own receipts from years past. 2 cities on a map, one showing the trail of what he owed me, the other showing the canyon he'd dug for himself. For the first time, I didn't feel like the younger brother stuck in his shadow. I felt like the one holding the light. The next morning, opportunity presented itself. My father called, voice low and deliberate, as though he'd been waiting for the right moment. Your mother's worried, he said. Evan's been circling her with this business idea. She wants to believe him. I don't. But she needs proof, Caleb. Proof that he's not what he says he is. It was a strange reversal. My father, who had always been the silent observer, was now asking me for help. Not to keep the peace, not to let it go, but to bring clarity. Do you have proof? He asked. I glanced at the folder on my desk. Yes, I said. I do. And in that moment, I realized the setup had been handed to me. Evan thought he was scripting the story, but he'd left me with the tools to rewrite it. I wasn't ready to strike just yet. Revenge wasn't about anger, it was about timing. And as I looked at the growing empire of clients, the trust of my father, and the folder of evidence sitting in front of me, I knew I was in the strongest position I had ever been. All that remained was patience. Let Evan make his move. Let him think he was in control. And when the time was right, the truth would land so hard it would leave no room for excuses, no room for charm, no room for escape. Because for once, the math was on my side. And that's when the call came from my mother. Her voice was shaky, caught between hope and fear. Caleb, she whispered, your brother wants us all to meet. He says he has something big to propose. Please, just come. Don't shut him out. I looked at the folder on my desk, then out the window at the city I was slowly conquering. Of course, I said. I'll be there. And I knew then. That meeting would be where the balance finally shifted. The meeting was set for Sunday evening at my parents' house, the same table where Evan had first turned my bank statement into his weapon. I arrived a few minutes early, carrying nothing but a slim leather folder tucked under my arm. My father answered the door, gave me one steady look, and nodded like he already knew I had come prepared. My mother fluttered around, anxious but hopeful, the kind of hope that's more about clinging to a picture than believing in reality. Evan arrived last, of course. He swept in wearing a blazer that didn't quite fit and cologne that entered the room before he did. He hugged my mother, slapped my father's shoulder, and gave me a smile that was all teeth. Glad you came, little brother, he said, as if he were the host. We sat. My mother poured tea, though her hands trembled enough that she spilled a few drops on the saucer. Evan cleared his throat and launched into his pitch with the flair of a man who had rehearsed in the mirror. He spoke about a revolutionary business idea, about untapped markets, about family legacy. His words were flashy, full of buzzwords, empty of substance. And then he pivoted. What I need, he said smoothly, is someone who understands numbers. Someone who knows how to handle the boring details while I drive the vision. Caleb, you're perfect for that role. And of course, I'd need an initial investment. Just a loan, really. Family helping family. We could both profit. He leaned back, smiling like the deal was already sealed. My mother looked at me with pleading eyes, silently urging me to say yes. My father watched Evan with the stillness of a hawk. I waited a beat, then another, letting the silence stretch. Finally, I opened my folder and slid a stack of papers onto the table. Evan's smile faltered. These, I said calmly, are your current bank statements. Overdraft fees, credit card balances, missed payments. I didn't go digging. Evan, you handed these to me yourself. I flipped to the next sheet, steady, deliberate. And this is a record of every dollar you've borrowed from me over the last 10 years. The totals are precise. The dates, the amounts, all here. I let the papers sit between us like a mirror. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My father's jaw tightened, but his eyes didn't leave Evan. Evan laughed, thin and sharp. You're really going to do this here? To me? To your family? No, I said, my voice calm even. I'm going to do this for our family. Because you've been lying for years. Because every time you said, I'll pay you back, you didn't. Because every time you cried bad luck, you weren't unlucky, you were reckless. And now you want to drag all of us into your hole and call it a business venture. I leaned forward, my voice still steady but sharper now. Not this time. Not again. My father broke the silence first. Is it true? He asked Evan, voice low, deliberate. Are these your numbers? Evan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. His hands twitched like he wanted to crumple the papers, but he didn't dare touch them. It's not. Look, numbers don't tell the whole story, he stammered. They tell enough, my father said. His tone left no room for debate. My mother looked between us, torn, but even she couldn't deny what was printed in black and white. Evan, she whispered, How could you? Her words trailed off into silence. Evan's bravado cracked. He tried one last desperate play. Fine. You think you're so much better than me, Caleb? Sitting on your money, acting like you're some saint? Without me, this family would be boring. Dead. I'm the one who brings life. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. What you bring, I said quietly, is debt, lies, and shame. The words hung in the air like a verdict. For the first time in years, I saw my parents' faces shift, not in confusion, not in doubt, but in recognition. They were finally seeing Evan for who he was. And they were seeing me not as the younger brother meant to clean up the mess, but as the one who had the strength to end it. I gathered the papers back into my folder, stood, and looked directly at Evan. You wanted transparency? Here it is. No more borrowing. No more pretending. If you want to climb out of the hole you've dug, you'll do it yourself. But you won't do it with my money, my time, or my silence. I turned to my parents. I love you both, but if you keep bailing him out, you're just choosing to live in his storm. I won't. And with that, I tucked the folder under my arm and walked out, leaving Evan pale and sputtering at the table, my parents stunned into silence. As I stepped into the cold night air, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because it was over, it wasn't. Evan would lash out, I knew that. But because, for once, the script wasn't his anymore. And what happened next would prove just how far he was willing to fall. The fallout came faster than I expected. Within a week, Evan's carefully spun web began to unravel. He had built his life on charm, on convincing people that his next idea was the one that would finally pay off. But charm only lasts as long as people are willing to suspend their disbelief, and after that night, the disbelief was gone. My father cut him off first. He called me the next morning, his voice firm, almost weary. We're done carrying him, he said. I should have done it years ago. And true to his word, he stopped answering Evan's calls about loans and emergencies. My mother, slower to break free, still tried to rationalize at first. But after Evan turned up at her door with a story about a stolen wallet, one she'd heard before, she finally saw it for what it was. She handed him a sandwich, told him she loved him, and then closed the door without handing over a cent. She called me afterward in tears. I never thought I'd have to do that to my own son, she said. But I realize now, I've been enabling him. The rest of the family followed suit. Sophia, who had been patient longer than anyone, stopped picking up when Evan's name lit up her phone. Our cousins, once entertained by his antics, grew tired of the endless cycle of excuses. Even Uncle Rob, who had always laughed off Evan's charm, muttered at the next family dinner, "Man's gotta learn to stand on his own 2 feet sometime." And Evan, without the safety net he'd relied on for years, started to stumble publicly. He was evicted from his apartment after missing too many payments. His so-called business venture fizzled before it even began. The people he had promised to recruit backing out the moment they realized there was no real plan behind his words. His car, the one he paraded around in to prove he was doing fine, was repossessed in broad daylight. People noticed. His image cracked. He called me once, late at night, voice slurred with anger and desperation. "You think you won," he hissed. "You turned them against me. You destroyed me." I listened in silence until he ran out of words, and then I said the only thing I could. "No, Evan, you destroyed yourself. I just stopped hiding it for you." Then I hung up. That was the last time I answered his calls. Meanwhile, my own life only grew steadier. My business expanded into something I could be proud of, something that no one could take away from me. My parents, once distant, began to rebuild trust with me, little by little. My father asked for advice more often. My mother, though still aching, began to see that boundaries weren't cruelty, they were clarity. And for the first time in years, when I walked into a family gathering, I wasn't the younger brother in Evan's shadow. I was my own man, standing on ground I had built myself. Months later, I saw Evan by chance. He was standing outside a pawn shop, his blazer worn thin, his face tired, the charm drained out of him. He saw me, but didn't wave. His eyes held mine for a moment, then dropped to the ground. For the first time, I didn't feel pity, or guilt, or anger. I just felt distance. A distance I had earned. As I walked away, I thought about that folder of receipts I'd once guarded so carefully. I didn't need it anymore. The numbers had already told their story, and the story ended with this simple truth. Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to stop saving the person determined to sink you. I'm Liam, 34, and I've always been the one in my family who goes overboard. At least, that's what my dad likes to say with a chuckle whenever I do anything remotely nice for someone I care about. I work hard. I run a small but successful construction company, and I've always believed that if you have the means to make life a little more special for the people you love, you should. So when my daughter Lily turned 8 this year, I wanted to give her something magical, something she'd remember long after she stopped believing in fairy dust and princess crowns. I spent weeks planning it. I hired a company that sets up mini carnival games and bouncy castles right in your backyard. We had a popcorn machine, cotton candy, face painting, even a balloon artist who could make a tiara out of twisted balloons. Lily had been talking about it for months, showing me crayon drawings of her dream royal carnival, asking if her friends could wear costumes, if we'd have a real crown for her. I said yes to all of it. I probably spent more than I should have, but watching her excitement grow was worth every cent. The morning of the party, I was buzzing with energy. Lily woke up, ran into the kitchen wearing her favorite sparkly pajamas, and practically danced when she saw the boxes of decorations and party favors by the door. "Daddy, is today really my royal day?" she asked, grinning with her missing front tooth. I knelt down and fastened the cheap plastic tiara I bought her on top of her head. "Today is your day, princess," I told her. By the time the vendors arrived, the backyard looked like something out of a Pinterest board. My friends and I helped set everything up: streamers, a photo booth, games, the works. Guests started trickling in, and Lily was beaming, running from the cotton candy machine to the bouncy house, dragging her cousins behind her. For a few hours, it felt perfect. Then I went inside to grab the cake. It was a huge 2-tier cake, the most expensive part of the whole thing. Vanilla with raspberry filling, covered in pink buttercream with sugar flowers. But when I pulled the lid off, my stomach dropped. Across the top, written in big blue frosting letters, were the words, "Congrats, Liam." For a second, I actually laughed. It had to be a mistake. But then my mom walked into the kitchen carrying a stack of paper plates. "Oh good, you found the cake," she said casually, as if nothing was wrong. "Mom," I said slowly, pointing to the lettering. "Why does Lily's cake say congrats, Liam?" She looked at me like I had asked why the sky was blue. "Oh, we just combined the parties. It made more sense that way. Your brother's little boy is turning 5 next week, so we figured we'd save everyone the trouble and just celebrate both kids today." I stood there frozen, cake knife in hand. "You what?" Before she could answer, my dad strolled in, laughing. "Don't make that face, son. It's just practical. Saves money, saves time, win-win." My brother, of course, chose that moment to appear with his phone out, recording a video for his Instagram story. "Hey man, great setup," he said cheerfully. "We told Liam he'd get a joint party this year, didn't we, babe?" His girlfriend, perched on a chair scrolling through her phone, didn't even look up but muttered, "Yeah, it's cute. He loves sharing." I wanted to scream. Instead, I walked outside and saw Lily standing by the popcorn machine, staring at me expectantly, waiting for her cake. My chest ached. I put on my best fake smile and brought the cake out, setting it on the table. The kids gathered around, cheering. Lily looked at the cake, then at me, then back at the cake again. Her smile faltered, just slightly. "Daddy," she whispered, "why does it say Liam?" "That's not me." I swallowed hard and told her we'd fix it later, but she was quiet through the entire song. She didn't blow out her candles. She just took off her tiara and handed it to me like she was giving up something important. That was the moment something inside me shifted. I didn't yell. I didn't throw the cake, even though a part of me wanted to. I just smiled tightly, helped Lily cut a slice, and stayed silent through the rest of the party. Every time my dad laughed about how smart it was to combine things, or my brother made a joke about saving me money, it felt like they were driving a nail a little deeper. By the time the last guest left and the vendors were packing up, I had already made up my mind. I walked back inside, grabbed my phone, and started canceling things. The joint family picnic next month, the Christmas trip we had planned, even the group chat I'd been running to coordinate events. I shut it all down. I didn't yell. I didn't explain. I just went quiet. And that's when the phone call started. The first call came that same night, just as I was getting Lily ready for bed. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, still in her princess dress, but without the tiara, picking at the hem. I was trying to distract her, asking which stuffed animal should guard her dream kingdom tonight, when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Dad. I ignored it. A minute later, Mom called. Then my brother. Then my aunt. The notifications were stacking up so fast, it was lighting up the room. Lily glanced at the phone, then at me. Are you in trouble? She asked softly. I smiled, ruffled her hair, and told her no, that sometimes grown-ups just get upset about silly things. She nodded but didn't look convinced. When she finally fell asleep, I slipped out into the hallway and checked my phone. There were 17 missed calls, a dozen voicemails, and the family group chat had exploded. Not cool, Liam. You embarrassed your brother. You ruined a good day over some cake lettering? Grow up. I scrolled, jaw clenched. My brother's messages were the loudest. You made everyone uncomfortable. Next time you want to sulk, just stay home. Liam had fun. Lily didn't even care. Stop being dramatic. I put the phone down and went to the kitchen. The house was quiet except for the hum of the fridge. I poured myself a glass of water and stared at the half-eaten cake on the counter. The blue frosting still said, "Congrats, Liam," like some cruel joke. For a split second, I thought about throwing it in the trash, but I didn't. Instead, I took a photo. Not for social media, not to send to anyone. Just for me. Proof that this happened. The next morning, Mom showed up unannounced. She let herself in like she always does, carrying a tray of muffins like that would smooth things over. "Good morning," she said brightly, as if we hadn't just exchanged 100 passive-aggressive messages. I stayed by the sink, arms crossed. "Morning," I said flatly. She put the tray down and sighed. "Listen, honey, yesterday just got a little mixed up, but it was still a nice party. Lily had fun, didn't she?" I almost laughed. She took off her tiara and wouldn't blow out her candles. Mom's smile faltered for a second, but then returned. "Kids bounce back. She'll forget about it by next week." I could feel my temper rising, but I stayed quiet. Mom went on, trying to spin the whole thing like it was no big deal. "You have to understand, your brother and his girlfriend are under a lot of pressure right now. They're saving for a house, and with Liam starting school soon." I cut her off. "So that justifies hijacking my daughter's birthday?" She frowned like I was the unreasonable one. "We didn't hijack anything. We just combined it. It's not like Lily didn't still have her party." "She didn't have her party," I said, my voice sharper now. "She had their party." Mom's lips pressed into a thin line. "You're overreacting." That was the moment I realized we weren't going to get an apology. Not from her, not from Dad, not from anyone. To them, I was being difficult. To them, this was just another instance of Liam making everything about him. After she left, I sat on the couch and thought about it for a long time. I kept replaying Lily's face when she saw the cake. I kept hearing my dad's laugh, my brother's offhand comment about saving me money. Something in me hardened. Over the next few days, the pressure campaign started. First came the guilt trips. "Lily's not the only grandchild. You should be happy they wanted to celebrate together. You're teaching her to be selfish." Then came the subtle jabs. My brother posted photos from the party with captions like, "Best day ever. Teamwork makes the dream work, and nothing wrong with a little family efficiency." The comments from our relatives were full of heart emojis and "so smart" and "love this idea." It was like I was the only one who saw anything wrong. Even my cousin texted me privately saying, "Man, I get why you're upset, but you kinda made it awkward leaving like that." I hadn't even left early. I just went quiet. Apparently silence was enough to brand me as the villain. Then came the kicker. My dad called me 2 nights later and said, in his most patient voice, "Son, I think you owe your brother an apology." I laughed. Out loud. "For what?" "For giving my daughter a party and watching you turn it into a group discount. You know he can't afford big parties like you can," Dad said. "It would have hurt his feelings if we'd done one for Lily and not for Liam. So instead you hurt Lily's feelings." There was a long pause on the line. Finally, Dad said, "You're too sensitive about this. She'll get over it. Family comes first." When I hung up, I didn't feel sad anymore. I felt cold. I spent the next few days ignoring calls and focusing on Lily. We did our own little makeup celebration, just the two of us, where I baked a tiny cake that actually said her name. She smiled for the first time since the party. That smile reminded me what really mattered, and it made me even more certain that I wasn't going to let this slide. But my family wasn't done. The weekend after the party, my brother hosted a casual barbecue at my parents' house. I wasn't planning to go, but then Lily asked if we could see Grandma and Grandpa, and I didn't want her caught in the middle of this mess. So we went. When we arrived, my brother greeted me like nothing had happened, beer in hand, grinning. "Hey man, no hard feelings, right?" I didn't answer. He clapped me on the shoulder anyway and said, "We were just talking about next year. We might as well do a joint party again. Maybe rent a bigger place this time. You can handle the setup again, right?" That was it. That was the moment the last thread of patience in me snapped. I smiled. A small, cold, tight-lipped smile. "Sure," I said, my voice calm in a way that made even him pause. "I'll handle everything." And that's when the idea started to form. A plan that would make sure none of them ever dismissed me or Lily like that again. But before I could put anything into motion, my brother made one more comment, loud enough for everyone in the yard to hear. "See? I told you he'd come around. He just needed to cool off. You know how Liam gets. Big feelings, big drama." Everyone laughed, even Dad. And I just stood there, smiling, because they had no idea what was coming. I wish I could say that barbecue was the last straw, that I went home, cut them off, and never gave them another chance to hurt us. But part of me, the part that still wanted to believe my parents could be better, hesitated. Maybe if I stayed civil, maybe if I let a little time pass, they would realize how hurtful they'd been. For a few weeks, I stayed quiet. I answered their calls politely, but briefly, kept conversations shallow. Lily asked if we were going back to Grandma's house soon, and I told her maybe, when things settled down. She didn't seem to mind. She was busy with her art projects and playing with the new bike I'd surprised her with. Life was starting to feel normal again. Then came my brother's text. "Hey, we're throwing a little get-together for Liam's school milestone. You guys better be there. Mom's already ordering the cake." Big family moment. I stared at the message for a long time before replying with a simple, "We'll see." I should have trusted my gut and stayed home. The little get-together turned out to be a full-blown family party, bigger than Lily's birthday had been. There were decorations, food trays, a rented bounce house. All the things I had arranged for Lily, except this time my parents had paid for it. They greeted us at the door with smiles, acting like nothing was wrong, ushering us in as though we were just another pair of guests. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, something started to twist. It wasn't the party itself. Liam deserved to be celebrated, of course. It was the way everyone avoided eye contact with me, the way my brother's girlfriend gave me that smug little smile when she saw us. "See? This is how you do it," she said under her breath as I walked past. Lily squeezed my hand tighter. The party went on, and I did my best to keep my daughter distracted, letting her play with her cousins and enjoy the games. For a little while, she was laughing again, and that made me relax. Until it was time for cake. The cake was massive, 3 tiers, superhero-themed, with sparklers on top. Everyone gathered around to sing, and I lifted Lily so she could see over the crowd. Then, as they brought the cake forward, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. It didn't just say, "Congrats, Liam." It said, "Congrats, Liam and Lily. 2 birds, 1 stone." And right there, in front of everyone, my mom announced, "We figured we'd celebrate Lily too, since we missed out on making her feel special last time." The words were meant to sound thoughtful, but they landed like a slap. The room erupted in polite cheers. My brother patted me on the back and said, "See, we're making it right." I looked at Lily, and her face told me everything. She was frozen, staring at the cake like it was a cruel joke. "Daddy," she whispered, "it's not my birthday anymore." I set her down and walked straight to the kitchen. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I gripped the edge of the counter and counted to 10, trying not to lose it in front of everyone. That's when I heard my parents talking in the dining room, just out of sight. "He should be grateful we included her," Mom was saying. After the scene he made, "This is the least we could do to smooth things over." Dad chuckled. "Exactly. Maybe now he'll stop acting like the world revolves around that kid." I froze. That kid. The way he said it, like Lily was an inconvenience. Like my daughter, his granddaughter, was some spoiled brat instead of a sweet, kind little girl who had done nothing wrong except want a party with her name on it. I turned and found them both standing there, smiling like they hadn't just gutted me with their words. "Liam," Mom said sweetly, "aren't you happy? This is our peace offering." "Peace offering?" I repeated, my voice quiet. "Yes," she said brightly. "Now everyone's included, no one feels left out, and we can move on from all that birthday drama. Isn't that nice?" I didn't trust myself to answer. Then my brother walked in and, as if to add insult to injury, handed me a stack of paper plates. "Hey man, can you cut the cake for us? You're good at that." That was it. I put the plates down and walked out. Not just out of the kitchen, out of the house entirely. I took Lily's hand, told her we were leaving, and didn't look back. "Daddy, are we in trouble?" she asked as we got into the car. I shook my head. "No, sweetheart. But we're done." That night, the phone call started again. This time, I didn't answer. Not for anyone. The next day, I woke up to a storm of messages accusing me of ruining another family event. My aunt texted, "You're teaching Lily to be dramatic." My cousin sent, "It's just cake, man." My brother sent a voice message saying I was selfish and ungrateful and that I owed mom and dad a thank you for trying to make amends. But the message that really did it, the one that made something inside me snap completely, was from my dad. "If you can't be part of this family without causing problems, maybe you should sit the next few events out. We'll invite Lily when she's old enough to come without the attitude." I stared at the message for a long time, my hands shaking. They weren't just dismissing me anymore. They were threatening to cut me out entirely and keep my daughter in their little orbit, as if they had any right to decide when or how she saw them. That was the moment I stopped hoping they'd change. That was the moment I decided I wasn't just going to pull back quietly. I was going to make sure they never had the chance to treat Lily like that again. And I was going to make sure they finally understood what it feels like to be excluded. The following week felt like walking through fog. I went to work, came home, made dinner, helped Lily with her homework, but I was on autopilot. There was no music in the house, no laughter, no calls answered. My phone sat face down on the kitchen counter, buzzing every few hours with another notification from someone in the family. I didn't check them. I didn't want to read another lecture or guilt trip or passive-aggressive plea to come back to the fold. Instead, I focused on Lily. She seemed quieter too, though she didn't say much about what had happened. One night as I was tucking her in, she asked me, very softly, "Daddy, why does everyone keep writing Liam's name on my cakes?" I sat on the edge of her bed and tried to explain that sometimes grown-ups make choices that don't make sense. That sometimes they think they're being fair when they're really just being selfish. She was quiet for a long time before saying, "I don't like parties anymore." Hearing that hit me harder than anything my family had said. Lily had been so excited for her birthday for months. She had counted down the days on the little calendar in her room, talking about cake flavors and dress choices. And now she didn't want parties at all. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at my laptop. Something in me had shifted completely. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was done. Done trying to reason with people who saw my daughter as an afterthought. Done waiting for an apology that would never come. But being done didn't mean doing nothing. I started thinking back over the last few years. All the little moments I had brushed off as just family being family. Times when my brother would accidentally forget to invite us to something, but somehow remember to tag me in the photos afterward. Times when my parents had said things like, "Don't spoil her," or "You're teaching her to expect too much." Times when I had hosted, paid for, or organized events and they had treated it like it was their effort, their generosity, their name that mattered. I started writing things down. Not out of spite, not yet, but because I needed to see it all in one place. A timeline of every slight, every dismissal, every time they had made Lily or me feel small. The list grew faster than I expected. The more I wrote, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't about one cake, or one party, or even one bad day. This was a pattern. This was how they had always treated us. Like we were convenient when we could contribute, disposable when we couldn't. I stayed quiet for a month. No visits, no calls, no texts beyond short responses when absolutely necessary. I could tell it was starting to get under their skin. My brother sent me a string of messages asking if I was still mad about the cake and accusing me of punishing the whole family over one little misunderstanding. My dad left a voicemail that said, "This is childish. We need to talk man to man." I didn't respond, but even as I was pulling away, I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. There were moments when I caught myself wondering if I was overreacting, if maybe I should just give in and let things go. That's what they wanted. They wanted me to cave, to show up at the next gathering, to laugh it off and pretend everything was fine. Then one afternoon, I got a call from Lily's school. Her teacher, Mrs. Chun, said Lily had been unusually quiet in class, not raising her hand or volunteering like she used to. She asked if something had happened at home. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just my burden. This whole situation was affecting Lily more deeply than I had realized. After I hung up, I went to pick her up early from school and took her to her favorite ice cream place. We sat in the booth, just the two of us, and I asked her what was wrong. She hesitated, stirring her ice cream until it turned into soup, before saying, "When we go to Grandma's house, it feels like no one sees me. Like I'm just there." That was the moment I knew there was no going back. That night, I sat down with my laptop again. But this time I wasn't just making a list. I was making a plan. I went through my emails, my receipts, my bank statements. I started documenting every party I had paid for, every event I had hosted, every expense I had covered over the years. I wasn't sure exactly how I was going to use it yet, but I knew I needed it. I started putting money aside too. A little extra each week, quietly building a separate fund. Not for me, for Lily. For her future, for anything that might give her joy and stability outside of this family circus. And slowly, I started cutting strings. I left the family group chat without saying a word. I unfollowed them on social media. I told my parents politely that we wouldn't be attending any more family events for a while. When they demanded an explanation, I simply said, "We need space," and left it at that. The backlash was immediate. My brother called me a coward. My aunt said I was alienating Lily from her family. My dad texted, "This is exactly what I was afraid of. You're letting your pride get in the way of family unity." But the quieter I stayed, the more control I felt returning to me. It was painful. Every memory, every guilt trip, every time I saw Lily glance at the phone when it buzzed and ask, "Is that Grandma?" But it was necessary. And as the weeks stretched into months, something unexpected happened. Lily started to bloom again. She smiled more. She laughed more. She stopped asking about the next party at Grandma's house. Instead, she asked if we could have our own little celebrations, just the two of us. Movie nights, pancake breakfasts, bike rides at the park. It was like she had been holding her breath for months and was finally exhaling. And that was when I knew that whatever plan I came up with, it had to be more than just cutting them off. It had to be something that showed them, clearly, undeniably, that we didn't need them. Something that made them feel the absence they had taken for granted. Something that would make them think twice before ever dismissing us again. Cutting them off was the hardest thing I'd ever done, at first. But once the noise faded, once the phone stopped buzzing and the guilt trips turned into awkward silence, I realized just how much space I'd given myself to breathe. For the first time in years, there were no last-minute family obligations dragging me away from my own plans, no passive-aggressive comments at Sunday dinners to swallow, no one rolling their eyes when I tried to do something nice for Lily. And in that quiet, I started to see possibilities. I threw myself into my work. My construction business had been running steadily for a few years, but I'd always kept it small, partly because I didn't want to miss too much time with Lily and partly because, if I'm honest, I didn't think I needed to push harder. But now I had a new kind of energy, sharper, more focused. I was determined to build something that was completely ours, something no one could take credit for or diminish. I started taking on bigger contracts, investing in better equipment, hiring a small but reliable crew. Word spread fast. We were professional, on time, and we didn't cut corners. By the end of that first quarter, we were booked out months in advance. Money wasn't the point, but the money started coming in. Enough that I could start seriously saving for Lily's future. Enough that I could pay off the last of my debts. Enough that I could finally take a deep breath without feeling like I was living paycheck to paycheck. And as my business grew, so did my confidence. One day, I caught myself looking in the mirror and barely recognizing the man staring back. Not because I'd changed physically, though I had lost a little weight and looked sharper now that I was sleeping better, but because of the way I carried myself. There was no heaviness in my shoulders anymore. And Lily noticed. "Daddy, you're smiling more," she said one evening as we were eating pancakes for dinner. I laughed. "I guess I am." She grinned, that big, gap-toothed grin I loved so much, and said, "I like it." We started creating our own traditions. Friday night movie marathons with popcorn. Saturday morning farmers market trips. Backyard campouts with a tent and flashlights where she'd fall asleep telling me ghost stories she made up on the spot. And for her next birthday, I didn't hold back. I didn't invite my family. I didn't tell them about it at all. Instead, I rented a small hall, invited her closest friends from school, decorated the place exactly the way she wanted, unicorns and glitter everywhere, and hired a local magician who had the kids screaming with laughter. Lily wore a brand new dress and a real tiara this time, one I bought from a little boutique just for her. When the cake came out, it had her name on it in big gold letters. She beamed at me, then leaned over and whispered, "This is the best party ever." And for the first time in almost a year, I felt something inside me fully unclench. But the real turning point came a few weeks later, when my brother called out of the blue. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hey man," he said, sounding strangely cheerful. "Listen, we're planning a big family barbecue next month, and Mom said it's not the same without you guys. Think you can come?" I didn't say yes or no. I just listened. He kept talking, making it sound like an olive branch, but every word confirmed what I already knew. They didn't miss us. They missed what we brought to the table. My effort, my money, my organizing skills. When I hung up, I didn't feel guilty this time. I felt powerful, and that power made me think bigger. I started putting serious work into my plan. I had spent months quietly gathering information, receipts, photos, screenshots of texts, proof of every time I had covered for them or hosted something or gone out of my way to make family events happen. I had everything lined up, but now I realized that the most effective revenge wasn't just a dramatic confrontation. It was building a life so complete, so unshakably good, that their absence was obvious, and making sure they knew exactly what they had lost access to. I started expanding my business even further. I got into commercial projects, partnering with local businesses, renovating storefronts and offices. Before long, I was making connections with people who had real influence in our town, people my parents used to brag about knowing distantly, but who now called me directly. One of those projects turned out to be especially important. A local community center was being renovated, and they wanted a family-friendly contractor who could work fast but do it right. I took the job, poured myself into it, and by the time we were done, the director of the center was raving about my work. She asked if I'd be willing to sponsor some of their future events. That's when it clicked. What better way to show my family what they'd lost than by becoming the person who could give other people's kids the magical experiences they had stolen from my daughter? I signed on as a sponsor for their annual carnival fundraiser, paying for the rides and games, the very same company I'd used for Lily's party, and made sure the event was open to the whole town. When the posters went up with my company's name on them, I knew it was only a matter of time before my parents saw. Sure enough, a week later, I got a message from my mom. "Saw your name on the carnival flyers. That's nice of you. Are we invited?" I didn't reply. Instead, I printed out a stack of VIP tickets for Lily's classmates and her teachers, and made sure she handed them out at school herself. Seeing her light up as she told me, "Everyone's so excited, Daddy," made it all worth it. Meanwhile, word of my business kept spreading. My brother, who worked in a related trade, had always been the one my parents bragged about, the hard worker, the one with a real job, but now he was asking me if I had any leads or openings on my crew because his hours were getting cut. I told him politely that we weren't hiring right now, but I'd keep him in mind. It was a small thing, but it felt like the scales were starting to tip. By the time summer rolled around, I was no longer the same man who had stood in that backyard, quietly swallowing humiliation. I was thriving. My business was thriving. Most importantly, Lily was thriving. And with every new success, every new connection, every smile on Lily's face, my plan for the perfect, quiet revenge became sharper. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to make sure they watched from the outside as we built a world without them. And then, when the moment was right, I was going to remind them exactly why they were no longer welcome in it. By midsummer, my business was not just surviving. It was thriving beyond anything I'd imagined. I had 3 full crews working jobs across town, a waiting list of clients, and enough saved to finally consider buying a bigger house. The more success I built, the clearer it became that my plan didn't need to be messy or loud. It just needed to be undeniable. The first piece of the puzzle fell into place on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was at a local chamber of commerce breakfast, something I'd started attending to network with other business owners, when I overheard 2 people at my table talking about a new community grant for small businesses. The grant wasn't just money. It also came with a partnership program to work with local schools, nonprofits, and public events. That was it. That was the key I didn't know I'd been waiting for. I applied the same day, submitting all my paperwork, photos of completed projects, testimonials from clients. Within a month, I was approved, and just like that, my company became one of the official partners for local town events. We were now the go-to contractor for renovations in public spaces and one of the main sponsors for school fundraisers and community fairs. This meant my company's name was on everything: flyers, banners, online ads. If there was a community event happening, chances were I had helped fund it, and I knew my parents were seeing it. My mom had always been heavily involved in the town's social scene: bake sales, fundraisers, PTA events. When I started showing up to those same events as a sponsor, and sometimes even a guest speaker, I could feel her discomfort from across the room. People were shaking my hand, thanking me, introducing me to their kids. At one event, I caught my mom standing in the corner, watching me as I handed out free drink tickets to a line of smiling parents. She didn't approach me, but later that night she texted, "Seems like you're doing well. Wish we could be part of it." I didn't reply. Instead, I started thinking bigger. If they wanted back in, they were going to have to see, really see, how much better life had become without them. And I was going to give them a front row seat. The opportunity came when the community center director asked if I'd be interested in funding their new Family Day festival. It was going to be the biggest event they'd ever hosted, with rides, food trucks, music, the works. They needed a main sponsor to cover the entertainment and equipment costs, and in exchange, they'd named the event after the sponsor. I didn't even hesitate. We signed the deal that afternoon, and within a week the posters were printed. Lily and Company. Family Fun Day, sponsored by Liam, last name, Construction. I had insisted on putting Lily's name in the title. When the director asked why, I said simply, "Because she's the reason I do all of this." Seeing my daughter's name on those posters, on banners strung across town, on the front page of the local paper, was the single most satisfying moment of my life up to that point. Lily's face lit up when she saw them too. "Daddy, it's my name. Everyone's going to see." "Yes, sweetheart," I said, hugging her. "Everyone's going to see." And everyone did, including my parents. 2 days later, I got a text from my brother. "Mom says we should all go to the Family Day event together. Can you get us some free passes?" I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. "No passes needed. It's open to the public. See you there." The week leading up to the event, I poured myself into the final preparations. I personally checked every vendor setup, made sure the rides were inspected, confirmed the band lineup, even added a few extra activities I knew the kids would love: face painting, a giant bubble station, a petting zoo. I wanted this event to be unforgettable, not just for Lily, but for everyone in town. And I wanted my family to see that I could give the community and my daughter something 10 times better than what they had tried to take from her. The morning of the festival, Lily woke me up early, practically bouncing out of bed. She put on the shirt I had made for her with the event logo on it, and I wore one to match. When we arrived at the park, she gasped at how big everything looked. The rides were already spinning, music was playing, and kids were running around with cotton candy. "This is amazing," she said, clutching my hand. "Enjoy it," I told her with a smile. "This is your day." As the crowds poured in, I saw them: my parents, my brother, his girlfriend, their son. They looked around like tourists, wide-eyed at the setup. My dad spotted me near the stage and walked over, his hands in his pockets. "This is impressive," he said gruffly. "Thanks," I replied. He hesitated, then said, "You really didn't have to do all this." I looked him dead in the eye. Yes, I did. He opened his mouth to say something else, but I was already walking away, heading toward Lily, who was waiting for me by the carousel. Throughout the day, I could feel my family watching me. Watching as kids ran up to thank me for the free tickets, as parents shook my hand, as the event director stood on stage and announced that this entire festival had been made possible by me and named after my daughter. I didn't gloat. I didn't even acknowledge them. I just kept smiling, kept making sure everything ran smoothly, kept making sure Lily was having the best day of her life. And as the sun started to set and the music swelled for the closing ceremony, I saw something in my parents' faces that I hadn't seen in a very long time. Regret. But this wasn't the end. This was just the setup. Because I wasn't done yet. This was only the moment that would make them listen when I finally spoke. And when I did, I wasn't going to raise my voice. I was going to make sure every single one of them understood, calmly, clearly, and permanently, that Lily and I were no longer the family afterthoughts. We were the ones who set the standard, and they would have to live with that. When the Family Day festival wrapped up, I expected a call, a text, something. But my parents stayed silent for days. I figured they were stewing, trying to figure out how to spin what they'd seen into something that didn't make them look bad. It didn't matter. I had already decided what came next. I spent the next 2 weeks putting everything in order. I had my timeline of past events printed and bound. Every party I'd paid for, every event I'd hosted, every message or comment that dismissed Lily or made light of our feelings. I organized the receipts, the screenshots, the photos, all neatly tabbed and highlighted. Not to throw at them in anger, but to hand over calmly, like evidence in a court case. Then I invited them all over. It was the first invitation I had extended in nearly a year. My parents, my brother, his girlfriend, even a couple of extended relatives who had been the loudest about family unity. I worded the invitation carefully. Dinner at my place. Come hungry. We need to talk. They showed up looking curious, maybe a little nervous. The smell of the catered meal, yes, catered, I wasn't wasting my energy cooking for them, filled the house. Lily was upstairs, happily watching a movie in her room. I had told her this was a grown-up conversation night. We ate first. I kept the conversation polite, almost unervingly polite, which I could tell was throwing them off. My brother cracked a few jokes that fell flat. My dad cleared his throat like he wanted to say something, but didn't. When the plates were cleared, I set a leather folder on the table. This, I said calmly, is the last year of my life. Every party, every expense, every time I tried to give my daughter something special and got treated like it was too much, like she was too much. I opened it and slid the first page across the table, a photo of Lily's cake with "Congrats, Liam," written across it in bright blue frosting. My mom flinched. "Do you remember this?" I asked. No one spoke. I turned the pages slowly, one by one, laying them out on the table. Screenshots of text dismissing my feelings. Photos of decorations I had paid for. Receipts with my name on them. Messages from them telling me to grow up and stop being dramatic. When I finished, the table was covered in proof. "This is what you've done," I said. My voice was quiet, but I could feel how heavy the room had become. "And for months, you tried to make me feel like I was crazy for being hurt by it. Like my daughter's feelings didn't matter. Like she didn't matter." My dad opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. "No, you don't get to interrupt. You've been talking over me for years. You can listen for 5 minutes." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. "You think I overreacted?" I continued. "You think it was just a cake, just a party, just one day. But it wasn't. It was a pattern where you treated Lily like a footnote, where you acted like my time, my money, my effort didn't count unless it benefited everyone else, where you laughed when I asked for respect. And I let it go, over and over again, until I couldn't anymore." My brother shifted in his chair, looking uncomfortable. My mom's eyes were shiny, but she still hadn't spoken. "So here's what's going to happen," I said, leaning back in my chair. "From now on, if you want to be in Lily's life, you do it on my terms. You respect her days, her birthday, her milestones, and you respect me when I say no. If you can't do that, you don't get access to us. No parties, no holidays, no quick visits to make yourselves feel better. Nothing." My brother frowned. "You can't just cut everyone out because of one mistake." "One mistake?" I repeated softly. "Look around, Matt. Does that look like one mistake to you?" I gestured to the table full of evidence. He didn't answer. "This isn't punishment," I said finally. "This is a boundary. You can either meet it, or you can stay on the outside looking in. It's your choice." Then I stood, calmly collected the papers back into the folder, and left the room. I didn't yell. I didn't slam a door. I just walked upstairs to check on Lily. Downstairs, I could hear them whispering to each other in the stunned silence I had left behind. When I came back down 10 minutes later, the house was empty. And that was exactly what I wanted. The next morning, I woke up to a text from my mom. "We didn't realize how much we hurt you. We need to talk." I didn't reply. Later that day, my dad called. I let it go to voicemail. My brother tried again that evening. I ignored it, because the revenge wasn't in the speech I had given them. The revenge was in the silence that followed, the silence they finally had to sit with. The next weekend, Lily and I went to the park. As we walked past the community center, I saw one of the new posters announcing that I'd been chosen as Business of the Year for the town's annual gala. I smiled to myself. When that gala came, I knew exactly who I was inviting as my guests of honor. Not my family, but Lily's teacher, her best friend's parents, the people who had supported us without condition. And I knew my family would hear about it anyway. That was the point. This wasn't about slamming the door forever. It was about making them knock and wait. The silence lasted longer than I expected. Weeks passed, then a month. No calls, no surprise visits, no last-minute guilt trips. For the first time in years, there was peace in my house. Real, lasting peace. Then the cracks started to show. One morning, I was at the office going over invoices when my phone buzzed with a message from my cousin. "Dude, your dad just told everyone at the diner that you banned them from Lily's life. What's going on?" I stared at the text for a second before replying. I set boundaries. If they want to call it a ban, that's their choice. That same evening, my mom called again. I answered this time. Her voice was small, softer than I'd heard in years. "Liam," she said, "we miss you. We miss Lily." I took a breath. "Then you know what you have to do." There was a long pause. "We were just trying to keep the family together," she said finally. "By erasing my daughter's name from her own birthday?" She didn't answer that. When we hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, grounded, like I'd finally stopped trying to run uphill. 2 weeks later came the town gala, the event where I was being honored as Business of the Year. The room was packed with local business owners, city council members, and community leaders. Lily sat at my table in her best dress, glowing with pride. Halfway through the evening, as they announced my award, I caught sight of my parents standing near the back of the hall. They hadn't been invited, but of course they'd found a way in. I walked up to the stage, accepted the plaque, and took the microphone. "Thank you," I said, scanning the crowd. "This means a lot. Not because of the business, not even because of the recognition, but because this company started with one goal: to build something better, to build something my daughter could be proud of. Every late night, every early morning, every risk I took was for her. And standing here now, seeing her smiling at me, that's the real award." The audience applauded, and I caught sight of my mom wiping at her eyes. My dad looked down at the floor. My brother wasn't even there. After the ceremony, as guests mingled, my parents finally approached. "Liam," my dad said quietly, we were wrong." It wasn't dramatic, no tears or shouting. Just 3 simple words that I'd been waiting to hear for over a year. "I know," I said. "We want to fix this," Mom added. "We don't want to miss any more of Lily's life." I looked at them for a long moment. "Then you don't get to just show up when it's convenient. If you're serious about this, you're going to have to show up consistently and respectfully." They nodded. We didn't hug. Not yet. But when I went back to my table, Lily leaned against me and asked, "Daddy, are they still mad at us?" "No," I said, kissing the top of her head. "They finally heard us." And that was the truth. Because the real revenge wasn't cutting them off forever. It was making them face what they had done, forcing them to sit in the silence long enough to realize they could lose us for good. And when they finally came back, they came back on our terms. That night, as we drove home with the award sitting on the seat next to Lily, she looked out the window and said, "Daddy, I think today was even better than my birthday." I smiled, my hands steady on the wheel. "Good," I said, "because this is just the beginning." And for the first time, I knew it was true. I was 29 when everything blew up, though looking back now, I should have seen it coming years earlier. My name's Dylan, and for most of my adult life, I practically lived at our family business. 70-hour weeks were my normal, dawn-to-dusk shifts, late-night calls, emergency weekend runs. I wore every hat: sales, logistics, troubleshooting, hiring, even cleaning the office when the janitor quit. I told myself it was worth it because one day, this business would be mine, or at least, I'd be a partner. My parents had always said that we were building a legacy together. I believed them. Then one rainy Thursday morning, over burnt coffee in the break room, I found out my entire future had been rewritten without me. I was going over invoices when my dad strolled in, looking oddly cheerful for a man who usually started the day with a grumble about fuel costs. He tossed me a pen, grinned, and said, "Well, it's official. Your brother's the boss now." I froze mid-sip. "What?" He leaned against the counter like this was good news. "We signed over the business last night. Your brother's the majority owner. He's a natural leader, Dylan." You've done great keeping things running, but this is the next step for the company." I just stared at him. My little brother, Ethan, who couldn't even remember to clock in on time, who'd spent the last 2 years using the company van to take his friends on camping trips. He was now in charge? Mom walked in a second later, carrying a stack of mail like this was a normal Tuesday. "Oh, don't look so surprised," she said, her tone a mix of cheerfulness and that slight edge she always got when I was being difficult. "You can still support him from the background. You're good at the operational stuff. Let him focus on the big picture." I set my coffee down before I threw it across the room. "So you gave him the business?" Just like that. No conversation. No warning. Dad's smirk was almost worse than the words. "We didn't think we needed your permission." That was the first time I walked out. Not quit. Not yet. But I left that morning without saying another word. I drove around for hours, replaying every sacrifice I'd made for this company. The birthdays I'd missed, the vacations I'd canceled, the relationships I'd ruined because I was always on call. And apparently, none of it mattered. When I showed up the next day, Ethan was already sitting in my chair. Literally. My office chair, feet kicked up on the desk, sipping soda from the company fridge. "Management's looking a little different these days, huh?" he said with a laugh. I kept my voice calm. Too calm, even to my own ears. "Move." He didn't. "Come on, man, lighten up. Dad says I should start learning the ropes." Thought I'd start here. Mom popped her head in at that exact moment, all smiles. "Dylan, be supportive. This is a big responsibility for your brother." I think that was the moment something inside me shifted. I realized they didn't just hand him the business. They expected me to keep propping him up, doing all the work so he could play CEO. I stopped staying late after that. If something broke at 8 p.m., I let it wait until morning. If Ethan forgot to place an order, I didn't scramble to cover for him. The first time I told Dad, "That's not my problem anymore," his face turned red. 2 weeks later, their biggest supplier pulled out. We'd relied on that account for years. I had personally maintained that relationship, called in favors, even driven across state lines once to fix a deal when things were falling apart. Losing them was a massive hit. Dad called me in a panic, voice tense. "You need to call them. Fix this." I leaned back in my chair at home and said, "Let the new boss handle it." He went quiet. For a long moment, I could hear him breathing on the other end, like he was trying to hold back his temper. Finally, he muttered, "We can't afford to lose them." "You should have thought about that before you made your decision," I said, and hung up. From that point on, it was like watching a slow-motion train wreck. Orders got delayed, clients started pulling contracts, morale tanked. Every time I walked past the office, I saw Ethan looking more and more stressed, like he hadn't realized running a business meant actually doing the work. The best part? They never once admitted they needed me. Not yet. Instead, Mom would send me little guilt-trip texts. "Family comes first, Dylan." Or Dad would leave voicemails about how we all need to pull together right now. And I ignored them. But then came the day that changed everything. The day they finally showed up at my apartment, looking pale and desperate, asking me to come back. And that's where things really started to get interesting. I wish I could say I felt some kind of satisfaction seeing them on my doorstep that morning, but honestly, I just felt tired. There they were, standing in the hallway like two kids called to the principal's office. Dad's jaw was tight. Mom had that pinched expression she got whenever she had to admit she was wrong, which wasn't often. Ethan wasn't with them, and that told me everything I needed to know. "Can we come in?" Mom asked, like we were casual neighbors dropping by to borrow sugar. I stepped aside without a word, watching them shuffle into my apartment like they were walking into enemy territory. Dad sat on the edge of the couch, looking at the floor. Mom tried to break the ice first. "Things have been difficult at the company." I stayed standing. I noticed. There was a long pause before Dad finally spoke. "We need your help, Dylan. You know those supplier relationships better than anyone. If we don't get them back, we're in serious trouble." It was almost funny, hearing him say we. The same man who'd signed my name off the company paperwork was suddenly including me again. "So call your CEO," I said flatly. Mom winced. "Dylan, please don't make this harder. Your brother is doing his best, but he's overwhelmed. He's just a natural leader?" I cut in, and her mouth snapped shut. The silence that followed was heavy. Dad finally looked up, his eyes hard. "If the business goes under, we all lose. Is that what you want?" I didn't answer right away, because the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted yet. Part of me wanted to swoop in and save the day like I always had. Prove to them that I was the backbone of this company, the one who made it all work. But a bigger part of me wanted them to feel what I had felt when they blindsided me. Powerless, discarded, irrelevant. Go home, I said quietly. Figure out how to fix your mess. Dad muttered something under his breath as they left, but I didn't catch it. I didn't care enough to ask. The weeks that followed were strangely peaceful for me. For the first time in years, I had weekends free. I slept past 6 a.m. I started going to the gym, cooking actual meals instead of eating takeout at my desk. I even reconnected with some friends I'd been blowing off for years. But while my life got calmer, theirs clearly didn't. I started hearing things, employees venting to me over text about missed paychecks, late shipments, and Ethan disappearing for hours in the middle of the workday. One night, my phone buzzed with a message from Carla, our best sales rep. Is this really what you wanted? Watching us all go down with the ship. That one stung. I wasn't trying to take anyone else down with them. The employees were like family to me. At least, more family than my actual family felt like at that moment. Then came the day Ethan showed up at my gym. He was sweaty, out of breath, like he'd run here. You've got to come back, he said without preamble. I grabbed my water bottle and just stared at him. You've never set foot in here before. What's wrong? He ran a hand through his hair. Everything. The numbers are bad. Dad's yelling all the time. Mom's threatening to sell the house to cover payroll. I don't know what I'm doing, man. They keep saying I should just trust my instincts, but I don't even have instincts for this stuff. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered all those smug grins when they announced he was in charge, the way he'd lounged in my chair and joked about learning the ropes. This is what you wanted, I said. He swallowed hard. No, this is what they wanted. I never asked for this, Dylan. They just told me it was mine. That was the first honest thing he'd said to me in months, and it stopped me cold. I can't fix this for you, I said carefully, but I might be willing to help. On my terms. He blinked, confused. What does that mean? You'll find out, I said, and walked out, leaving him standing there in the parking lot. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad and started writing down everything I knew about the business. Contacts, contracts, debts, assets, leverage points. I realized something as I made that list. I had way more power than I thought. Not just operational knowledge, but relationships, trust, influence. If I wanted to, I could pull this company out of the hole. Or I could burn it to the ground and watch from a distance while they scrambled. For the first time since that awful morning in the break room, I felt something other than anger or exhaustion. I felt calm, focused, in control. I didn't call them the next day, or the day after. I waited, letting them sweat, letting things get just a little bit worse. And then, just as I was about to set my plan in motion, something happened at the company that changed the game completely. Something that made me realize this wasn't just about business anymore. It was personal. I woke up that Monday to a flood of messages on my phone. Missed calls from employees, a few texts from Carla in all caps. Call me ASAP. It's bad. That was enough to get me dressed and in the car before I'd even had coffee. I wasn't planning on going to the office, but something in my gut told me I needed to see this for myself. When I got there, the parking lot was half empty, which was unusual for a Monday morning. I walked in and immediately felt it, that heavy, nervous tension in the air, like everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Carla met me by the front desk, pale and furious. They laid off half the floor staff, she said without even saying hello. No notice, no severance. People showed up this morning and their badges didn't work. What? My voice echoed down the hallway. She nodded grimly. Your brother said it was the only way to save the business. They're clearing out people's lockers right now. I marched straight to the office, my heart pounding. The door to my old office was closed, but I could hear voices inside, my parents and Ethan. I didn't knock. I just walked in. Ethan was behind the desk, looking harried, while Mom was sitting stiffly in the guest chair and Dad was pacing like a general giving orders. They all froze when they saw me. Good. You're here, Dad said, like I'd been summoned. Maybe you can explain to Carla and the rest of the staff that this was necessary. Necessary, I repeated. You fired people who have worked here for 15 years with no notice. Mom clasped her hands in her lap, like she was trying to look sympathetic. It wasn't an easy decision, Dylan, but payroll was killing us. The company couldn't survive another month at this burn rate. And instead of talking to me, or even them, you just what? Lock them out. Ethan rubbed his forehead. It was Dad's call. He said, "Don't throw me under the bus," Dad snapped. "We're all doing what we can to keep this company afloat." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These were people who had been loyal through thick and thin, who had stayed late nights with me to meet impossible deadlines, who had celebrated birthdays in this building, and they'd been tossed aside like they didn't matter. "You could have sold some of the assets," I said coldly. "Scaled back production. Negotiated with vendors. There were options." Dad's face darkened. "I don't need a lecture from someone who walked out when things got hard." I took a step closer. "I walked out because you lied to me. Because you gave away everything I'd worked for without a second thought. Don't pretend this is my fault." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mom said something that made my stomach drop. "We used your savings." I blinked. "What?" She glanced nervously at Dad before continuing. "The business account was dry. We had to move some money around to make payroll last month. Your personal savings were sitting there and used, and we figured." "You what?" My voice cracked like a whip. Dad stepped in, defensive now. "You weren't using it. And we were desperate. It's not like you're homeless. You should be willing to make sacrifices for the family." I could actually feel my pulse in my temples. That money was everything I'd managed to save in 10 years. The only reason I'd kept working those 70-hour weeks without demanding a salary that matched my output. I had plans for that money. A house. A future. "You stole from me," I said quietly, my voice shaking with rage. Mom's eyes filled with tears. "Don't be dramatic." I slammed my hand on the desk so hard the coffee mug rattled. "You stole from me." The room went silent. Ethan just stared at the floor, guilt written all over his face. Dad didn't flinch. He just folded his arms. "If the company survives, you'll get it back. But we needed it more than you did." That was it. The line they couldn't uncross. It wasn't just about them choosing Ethan anymore. It was about them taking everything I had left and acting like I should thank them for it. I turned on my heel and walked out, ignoring Mom calling my name. Carla was still standing by the front desk when I passed, and she must have seen my face because she didn't say a word. I just got in my car, drove home, and sat there in silence for an hour. That night, I went through every account, every email, every file I had access to, and I still had a lot. My name might not have been on the business anymore, but my fingerprints were everywhere. I knew where every contract was stored, every supplier's pain point, every client's tolerance level. I knew which of our competitors were circling, waiting for a chance to poach. And for the first time, I didn't feel helpless. I didn't feel like the discarded son or the overlooked workhorse. I felt like someone holding all the cards, watching the other players sweat. But there was one more blow coming. One more betrayal that would turn this from a personal feud into a war. 3 days later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from the company's legal department. Well, what was left of it, informing me that I was being sued for breach of fiduciary duty. I laughed out loud when I read it, the sound sharp and bitter in my empty apartment. They were claiming that by leaving, I had caused damages to the company, that I had sabotaged them by refusing to step in when things went bad. They were trying to make me the scapegoat for their mess. I sat there for a long time with that letter in my hand, and then I smiled. Not the bitter, hollow smile I'd had the day they told me Ethan was the new owner. A real smile. If they wanted a fight, they were about to get one, just not the kind they were expecting. Because now, it wasn't about saving the company anymore. It was about making sure they understood exactly what they had thrown away and watching them pay for every single choice they'd made. And that was the night I started building the kind of revenge you don't come back from. After the lawsuit letter, something in me hardened. I stopped taking their calls altogether. When Mom texted me pleading emojis and "we can fix this," I let the messages sit unread. When Dad left me voicemails saying I was being childish, I deleted them without listening past the first 5 seconds. And when Ethan sent a single, desperate text, "Please just talk to me," I turned my phone face down on the table and sat in silence, letting the hum of my apartment fill the room. But silence didn't mean inaction. I took a hard look at my life, at what I'd let myself become. For years, I'd been chained to that business, convinced that if I just worked hard enough, I'd earn a seat at the table. But that was the problem. I wasn't at the table. I was on the menu. I was the free labor, the reliable son, the one who didn't make waves. The one they thought would keep sacrificing himself no matter how little they gave back. Not anymore. I started pulling together every scrap of documentation I had, emails, signed contracts, payment histories, text messages where Dad had directed me to make certain deals. I backed up everything to an encrypted drive, partly for legal protection, partly because I knew it would matter later. If they wanted to accuse me of sabotage, I'd show them exactly how many fires I'd put out over the years, and how many I'd kept from burning the whole building down. Then I started talking to people. Quietly. I called Marcus, our main supplier's rep, the one who had pulled out a month ago. We'd been friends for years, and he'd always respected the way I handled things. I didn't badmouth my family. I didn't have to. All I did was ask how things were going since they left our contract. Better than I expected, Marcus admitted. Your brother tried to renegotiate terms we'd agreed on for years. It was insulting. We went with another buyer. Shame, really, you always kept things fair. That conversation confirmed what I already knew. I was the glue. Without me, every deal they had was on borrowed time. Next, I reached out to a few of our key clients. Casual conversations, under the radar. I asked how they were feeling about their accounts, how they were being treated, if they'd noticed any changes. The answers were depressingly predictable: late deliveries, missed emails, a lack of professionalism. One client, one of our top 3 accounts, told me outright, we're giving them 30 more days before we switch providers. I didn't tell my family that, of course. I just thanked the client for their honesty and filed that little piece of information away. Meanwhile, I started rebuilding myself outside of them. I picked up consulting work on the side, something I never had time for when I was drowning in my family's business. Word spread fast. Apparently, people had always known I was the one doing the heavy lifting behind the scenes, and they were happy to pay me for my expertise now that I was on my own. For the first time in years, I had money coming in that was mine. No dad controlling the purse strings, no mom borrowing from my savings without asking. Just me, my work, and my bank account slowly refilling. But as my life started to rise from the ashes, the company's decline became impossible to ignore. I drive past the building sometimes, not to go in, just to watch. Trucks that used to load up twice a day were now sitting idle. Half the parking lot was empty. The few employees who were left looked exhausted, carrying the weight of a sinking ship. One Friday evening, Carla called me. Her voice was shaking. They cut our hours again, she said. No warning. Just an email saying we're all down to 30 hours a week until further notice. People are crying, Dylan. We don't know how we're supposed to pay rent. My chest ached hearing it. These weren't just names on a payroll sheet to me. These were people I'd laughed with, stayed late with, celebrated milestones with. And my parents had treated them like disposable assets. I'm sorry, Carla, I said softly. Hold on a little longer. Things are going to change. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I meant every word. The final push came 2 weeks later. I was at a small cafe downtown, laptop open, working on a new consulting proposal, when I saw Ethan through the window. He looked like a ghost, pale, shoulders slumped, dark circles under his eyes. He spotted me and came in without hesitation. Can we talk? He asked, and I nodded toward the empty chair across from me. He sat down heavily and ran his hands over his face. They're selling off equipment now, he said. Dad's talking about taking out another loan. Mom's, I don't even know. She's barely speaking to me. She keeps saying this is my fault, that I'm not living up to what they trusted me with. I didn't say anything, just let him get it out. Finally, he looked at me with something close to desperation. I can't do this anymore, Dylan. I didn't even want this job, you know? They just handed it to me and said I'd figure it out. But I'm drowning, and they still won't admit they made a mistake. That was the first time I saw my brother for what he really was. Not just the golden child who got everything handed to him, but another pawn in their game. They'd set him up to fail just as much as they'd set me up to be their workhorse. I'm not coming back to save them, I said quietly. He nodded like he'd expected that. I didn't think you would. But if you were going to, what would you do? That question hung in the air like smoke. I closed my laptop and leaned in. I'd rebuild it my way. Clean house. Start fresh. No more favoritism, no more secrets. But I'm not sure there's anything left worth saving. He swallowed hard. If you ever decide to do it, I'm on your side. That surprised me. For months, I'd seen Ethan as the enemy, but now he looked like someone who wanted out just as badly as I had. After he left, I sat in the cafe for a long time, staring at my untouched coffee. The company was circling the drain. My parents were still too proud to admit they'd ruined it. And now even their chosen heir was ready to jump ship. This wasn't just rock bottom for them. It was rock bottom for all of us. But rock bottom has a funny way of clarifying things. It strips away illusions. It shows you who you really are and what you really want. And as I walked home that night, I realized what I wanted wasn't just to watch them fail. I wanted to rise, higher than I ever had before. I wanted to take back what was stolen from me, on my terms, in a way that made it impossible for them to ever treat me like I was second best again. And so, for the first time, I started putting together an actual plan. Not just vague ideas or angry daydreams. A real, tangible strategy. A way to rebuild, not just for me, but for the people they had hurt. But before I could move forward, there was one last thing I had to do. One final conversation that would either blow the whole thing up or give me the leverage I needed. And that conversation? It was going to happen with my father, face to face. I scheduled the meeting with my dad on a Wednesday afternoon, knowing he'd be at the office alone. Mom usually left by 2 on Wednesdays, and Ethan had started working from home more often, which I knew really meant hiding from the chaos. I wanted Dad without an audience. When I walked into the building, the place felt eerily quiet. The receptionist was gone, probably one of the layoffs. The phones that used to ring constantly were silent. It felt less like a business and more like an abandoned shell of what used to be. Dad was in his office when I walked in, hunched over a stack of papers. He looked up, startled, then scowled. "You have some nerve showing up here unannounced," he said. I shut the door behind me and sat across from him. "We need to talk." He tossed his pen down. "We've been trying to talk to you for weeks. You're the one who walked away." "No," I said evenly. "You walked away. From me, from everything I built here. You signed me out of the company and gave my work to someone who didn't even want it. You made me the enemy." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "I made the decision that was best for this company. And how's that working out for you?" I asked quietly. For a moment, the mask slipped. His jaw tightened, and I saw it, the fear, the desperation, the knowledge that he was losing control. "What do you want, Dylan?" he asked finally, his voice quieter now. I smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Leverage." He frowned. "Excuse me. You sued me." I reminded him, pulling the letter from my bag and laying it on his desk. So I did some digging. Turns out I still have access to quite a bit of documentation. Invoices, emails, signed directives with your signature on them. His face paled slightly. "I have proof," I continued, "that I was the one handling 90% of this company's operations for years. Proof that I kept this place afloat when you were out of town and Ethan was on vacation. Proof that you used my personal savings without consent. If you want to drag me into court and claim I abandoned my fiduciary duty, go ahead. I'll show the judge exactly how much unpaid labor I put into this business while you treated me like a volunteer." For a long time, he didn't say anything. I could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Finally, he cleared his throat. "What are you asking for?" I leaned forward, my voice steady. "Drop the lawsuit. Return every cent you took from my savings with interest. And when this company finally collapses, because let's be honest, it's heading there, I want first rights to buy it out. At liquidation value." He actually laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You think I'd let you take over what I built?" I stood up, taking the letter back. "You won't have a choice. Because the moment this goes public, your reputation is done. Your clients will walk, your suppliers will blacklist you, and your employees will know exactly who gutted their livelihoods." I didn't wait for him to respond. I just walked out, leaving him staring at the empty doorway. That was the moment things shifted for good. Over the next few weeks, I became a shadow, not involved directly, but always present, always watching. I met with employees who'd been laid off, asking them what they needed most. I reached out to suppliers, floating the idea that I might start something new, something fairer. To my surprise, almost every single one said the same thing. "If you do, we're with you." I even had lunch with 2 of our biggest clients. I kept it casual, asking about their future plans, their frustrations. Both admitted they were already looking for alternatives. One of them said outright, "If you were still running things, we wouldn't be leaving." That statement hit me harder than I expected. I started sketching out what my own company would look like, leaner, smarter, with better pay and real investment in the people who kept it running. I found a small warehouse on the edge of town that had been sitting empty for months and reached out to the owner about leasing. I even talked to a banker about startup loans. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to what my family did. I was acting on my own terms. Meanwhile, the family business was circling the drain faster than ever. Equipment sales brought in some quick cash, but it wasn't enough. Payroll kept shrinking. One by one, key staff quit. Carla texted me one night. "I'm giving my 2 weeks tomorrow. I can't do this anymore." I told her to wait. "Hold out a little longer," I wrote back. "I have a plan. And when I move, I want you with me." She replied instantly. "Then I'm in. Just say when." Ethan stopped by my apartment again a few days later. He looked even worse than before, but there was a strange relief in his face when I opened the door. "Dad's furious," he said as soon as he walked in. "He says you threatened him. He says you're trying to destroy the company." "I'm not trying," I said, motioning for him to sit. "He's doing that all on his own. I'm just making sure when it happens, I'm ready to pick up the pieces." To my surprise, Ethan nodded. "Good, because I think I want in." That made me pause. "You want in?" He nodded again, more firmly this time. "If you really are going to rebuild, I want to be part of it. I'm done letting them use me as a puppet." I studied him for a moment, trying to decide if I believed him. And for the first time, I realized I did. "Fine," I said at last. "But if you're in, you play by my rules. No shortcuts, no favoritism. We do this right." He grinned faintly, and for the first time in months, I saw my brother, not the entitled golden boy, but the kid who used to sit with me in the garage building model cars until midnight. "Deal," he said. That night, I stayed up until 2 in the morning finalizing my plan. I called the banker the next day and secured the funding. I signed the lease on the warehouse. I drafted offer letters for the employees I wanted to bring with me. The pieces were falling into place. And just when everything was ready, just when I had my new company poised to launch, the final domino tipped. The family business missed payroll. For the first time in its history, they couldn't pay their people. And that was the moment I knew it was time to act. When I heard about the missed payroll, I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel guilt either. What I felt was inevitability. This was the point of no return. The moment where everything they'd built, everything they'd sacrificed me for, finally crumbled under the weight of their own decisions. Carla called me that morning, her voice shaking. "People are walking out, Dylan. Like literally just leaving mid-shift. They say they're not coming back until they get paid." "Good," I said softly. "Good?" she repeated, incredulous. "Yes. Hold on. I'm about to give them somewhere else to go." I hung up and got to work. The first step was assembling my list. The people I trusted most, the ones who had stayed loyal to me even after I left. Carla was at the top. Then Miguel from shipping, who had kept the loading docks running like a well-oiled machine. Then Lacey from accounting, who quietly texted me updates every few weeks about just how bad things were getting. I sent them all the same message. "Meet me tonight, 7 p.m., at the warehouse on 3rd. No questions. Trust me." By 6 that evening, I was pacing the concrete floor of the warehouse, my breath visible in the chilly air. The place was empty but full of potential, wide open space, high ceilings, room to grow. I'd already signed the lease and negotiated a 6-month grace period before the first payment was due. If I moved fast, we could be operational in weeks. One by one, they arrived. Carla first, her coat pulled tight against the cold, then Miguel, then Lacey. Soon there were nearly a dozen people standing in a loose circle, murmuring questions. I stepped into the center and took a deep breath. "I called you here because it's time," I said, my voice echoing off the walls. "You've all seen what's happening at the company. You know it's not coming back from this. I'm not asking you to save it. I'm asking you to help me build something new." There was a long silence. Then Carla crossed her arms. "And how exactly do you plan to do that? We don't have equipment. We don't have trucks. We don't even have a payroll right now." I smiled. "We will. I've secured funding. I've got a lease on this place. I've already lined up 2 suppliers who are willing to work with me the moment we're ready to start production. And if I have the right team," I looked around the circle, meeting each pair of eyes, "I can land clients before the end of the month." Miguel let out a low whistle. "You're serious. Dead serious." Lacey spoke next, hesitant but hopeful. "And what happens when your parents find out?" "Then they find out," I said simply. "But by the time they do, it'll be too late to stop us." The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Carla stepped forward and held out her hand. "I'm in," she said. One by one, the others followed. That night, we stayed in the warehouse for hours, huddled around a folding table with notebooks and laptops, mapping out everything: staffing needs, timelines, supply chains. Miguel made a list of the equipment we'd need to get started. Lacey began sketching out a budget. Carla started drafting letters to potential clients, positioning us as the better alternative, faster, more reliable, built on trust. When I left that night, I felt lighter than I had in months. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to my parents' choices. I was making my own. The next step was leverage. I knew my parents' finances were strained, but I didn't know how badly until Lacey slid a folder across the table at our next meeting. "They're months behind on payments to half their vendors," she said quietly. "If someone, say, a competitor, made a better offer, those vendors would drop them in a heartbeat." I nodded slowly. "Then that's exactly what we'll do." Within a week, I had personally called every vendor I had a relationship with. I didn't trash talk my parents, didn't beg them to switch. I simply laid out my vision. A smaller, more agile operation. Fair contracts. Guaranteed payment on time, every time. Nearly all of them agreed to come on board the moment we went live. Meanwhile, Ethan started feeding me inside information. He'd become my quiet ally, staying just close enough to my parents to know what they were planning, but far enough away to avoid being dragged under with them. "They're talking about selling the last truck to make payroll," he told me one night, sounding exhausted. "If they do that, they won't be able to deliver orders even if they get new clients." "Let them," I said. "The more they strip this thing down, the easier it will be to rebuild without them." And then came the final piece of the puzzle, the confrontation. I didn't want to wait until they found out on their own. No, I wanted them to know what was coming. I wanted them to see me standing on my own 2 feet, calm and unshaken, as I told them exactly how this was going to play out. So I called Dad and told him we needed a family meeting. When I walked into their house that Saturday, Mom was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, her expression tight. Dad was by the window, staring out at the driveway like he'd been waiting for me. Ethan sat at the far end of the table, silent. "What is this about?" Mom asked, her voice cool. I sat down across from them and folded my hands. "I wanted to tell you face to face so there's no confusion later. I'm starting my own company." Mom blinked. "You can't be serious." "I'm very serious," I said. "I've got funding, I've got a team, and I've got suppliers ready to go. When you go under, and you will, I'll be ready to take over your contracts. The business won't die. It just won't belong to you anymore." Dad's face turned red. "You think you can just steal what I built?" "I'm not stealing anything," I said evenly. "I'm offering your employees a lifeboat. You left them to sink. I'm giving them a chance to survive." Mom's voice was sharp. "This is revenge. That's what this is." I met her gaze without flinching. "You're right. It is. And it's also justice. You stole my future, you stole my savings, and you sued me for not saving you from yourselves. This is me taking back control." Ethan spoke up then, quietly but firmly. "I'm with him." Mom turned on him, horrified. "You can't mean that." "I do," he said. "I can't keep doing this. You've run this company into the ground and blamed everyone but yourselves. I'm done being your scapegoat." For a long moment, no one spoke. The kitchen was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Finally, Dad slammed his hand on the table. "If you think you're going to destroy us and get away with it, you've got another thing coming." I stood, calm, collected. "I'm not destroying you. You did that yourselves. I'm just making sure when the dust settles, there's something left for the people who deserve it." I left them sitting there, stunned and furious. And as I walked out to my car, I felt the shift. The power was mine now. They could rage, they could threaten, but the truth was clear. I had the employees, the suppliers, the future. All that was left was to let the collapse finish what I had started and be ready to catch everything when it fell. The following week felt like the calm before a storm, except I wasn't afraid of it. I was the storm. I had timed everything down to the day. The suppliers had been primed, the employees had their contracts ready, and the banker had finalized the transfer of funds to my account. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to pull the trigger, and the missed payroll had set the perfect stage. The first domino fell on Monday morning. Carla was the one who lit the match. She gathered the remaining employees, all 12 of them, in the break room and announced that they were done. "We've been loyal for years," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "But loyalty doesn't pay rent. We deserve better than this. So we're leaving." Dad stormed out of his office, red-faced and shouting, "If you walk out that door, you're blacklisted from this industry." Carla didn't even flinch. "Funny," she said, because I already have a new offer on the table, and I think most of us will be taking it." And just like that, they left, together, a silent line of people walking out the front doors for the last time. Miguel was the last to go, pausing just long enough to toss his ID badge onto the counter before following the others out. Within an hour, production had ground to a halt. There was no one left to run the machines, no one to process orders, no one to pick up the phones. I was standing in my new warehouse when Carla and the others arrived. They looked lighter, relieved, even though the situation was still risky. "Welcome home," I told them. We got to work immediately. By the end of the day, the new company, my company, had a name, a logo, and a launch plan. Lacey had already filed the paperwork to make it official. The suppliers I'd courted for weeks sent over their contracts, ready to start shipping the moment we were operational. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. I called the top 3 clients personally. "This is Dylan," I told them, my voice calm but confident. "I know you've been frustrated with service lately. I wanted you to know that I'm starting a new operation, smaller, leaner, but with the same reliability you remember. If you want to switch, I can have you on board within a week." All 3 said yes. Just like that. By Wednesday, word had gotten out. My parents were livid. I knew because Mom showed up at my apartment, unannounced, just like they had the first time they'd begged me to return. "How could you do this?" she demanded the moment I opened the door. "You're tearing this family apart." I didn't invite her in. I stood in the doorway, calm and unshaken. "No," I said quietly. "You tore this family apart the day you decided I wasn't worth a conversation before signing me out of my own future. All I'm doing is cleaning up the mess you left behind." Her lip trembled. "Your father is furious. He says he'll take legal action." "Let him," I said. "I have documentation that will bury him if he tries. He knows it." For the first time, she didn't have a response. She just stood there, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. "This doesn't have to be ugly," I added. "You could walk away with some dignity left. But if you keep fighting me, you're going to lose everything." She left without another word. That night, I stood in the middle of the warehouse watching the team unpack new equipment. The air smelled of dust and fresh paint, and there was a buzz of energy I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just business, it was possibility. And then, as if the universe was rewarding my patience, the final piece fell into place. Lacey came running over with her laptop. "You have to see this," she said breathlessly. She turned the screen toward me, and there it was, the announcement that my parents' company had defaulted on its largest loan. The bank was seizing assets. Trucks, machines, everything. "This is it," I said softly. The next morning, I put on my best suit and drove to the auction. It wasn't glamorous, just a handful of bidders and a tired-looking bank representative. But when the bids opened, I raised my paddle with a calm confidence I didn't feel the first time I'd walked out of that company. One by one, I bought everything. The machines, the trucks, even the office furniture. And I got it all for pennies on the dollar. When the paperwork was signed and the keys were in my hand, I didn't go straight to the warehouse. No, I drove back to the office, one last time. Dad was there, sitting in the empty space like a king without a throne. "You," he said when I walked in, his voice shaking with fury. "Me," I agreed. I set the keys down on the counter. "These are mine now." His face went white. "You think this makes you better than us?" "No," I said, my voice calm. "It just makes me free." I turned to leave, but stopped in the doorway. "Oh," I added over my shoulder, "and I'll be moving the equipment out by the end of the week. You might want to lock up before then. Wouldn't want someone to break in." I didn't wait for his response. I walked out into the sunlight, the keys jingling in my hand like a victory bell. But this wasn't over yet. No, the real revenge would come when the world saw the rise, when the clients, the vendors, and the community saw that the son they dismissed had built something better, stronger, and fairer than they ever did. And when the first contracts started rolling in, when my parents realized that not only had I taken the company they refused to give me, but I had turned it into something they could never have imagined, that would be the moment I'd been waiting for all along. And I was only days away from making that moment happen. Launch day didn't feel like a launch day. It felt like the first day of my real life. The warehouse was spotless, the equipment humming softly like a promise, and the smell of fresh paint still clung to the walls. Carla stood next to me, clipboard in hand, already barking out instructions like she'd been doing this for years. Miguel and his crew were unloading the trucks we'd bought at auction, wearing matching grins. At exactly 9 a.m., The first client walked through the door to sign our contract in person. By noon, 2 more had arrived. Lacey was at her desk fielding calls, her face glowing as she mouthed, "Another one switching." By the end of the first week, we had replaced almost every major account my parents' company had lost and taken half the ones they still had left. But it wasn't just the clients. It was the energy. The employees were laughing again, staying late because they wanted to, not because they were scared of losing their jobs. I made sure everyone was paid on time, early, even, and gave them all a small signing bonus out of my own pocket. The first time I saw one of the new hires crying in the break room because no boss has ever done that for me, I realized just how far the old company had fallen. Word spread fast. Our name was suddenly on everyone's lips. Suppliers bragged about working with us. Clients recommended us to other businesses. Even the local paper did a small feature about the new player shaking up the industry. And then, inevitably, my parents came to see it for themselves. It was a Friday afternoon when they showed up at the warehouse. The parking lot was full, trucks coming and going, employees waving to each other, music playing from somewhere in the back. I met them just inside the loading bay. Mom looked pale, Dad looked angry, and Ethan stood a few feet behind them with his arms crossed, making it clear he wasn't here on their side. "This is what you've been doing?" Dad said, sweeping an arm at the bustling floor. "This is what I've built," I corrected him calmly. "You stole everything from us," Mom said, her voice brittle. "No," I said, stepping closer so they couldn't miss a word. "I offered you chance after chance to do the right thing. You ignored me. You signed me out of the business, stole my savings, sued me for walking away, and blamed everyone but yourselves for the mess you made. I didn't steal this. I earned it." For a moment, they just stood there, silent. The noise of the warehouse went on around us, a constant reminder that life was moving forward, with or without them. "You could still come back," Mom said suddenly, her tone soft, almost pleading. "We could rebuild together. As a family." I actually laughed at that, a short, disbelieving sound. "Rebuild what? There's nothing left to rebuild. Your company is gone, and you did that yourselves. This is the future now, and you're welcome to watch from the sidelines." Dad's face turned red. "You think this makes you some kind of hero?" "No," I said simply. "It just makes me free." They left without another word, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the crushing weight of trying to win their approval. I didn't feel the guilt or the anger or the exhaustion. I felt peace. Over the next few months, the old company was formally dissolved. The bank sold off what little remained. The building was emptied and eventually listed for sale. My parents tried starting a smaller operation out of their garage, but with no employees, no suppliers, and no clients, it fizzled out within a few months. Meanwhile, my company thrived. We doubled our staff by the end of the first quarter and had to lease the neighboring warehouse for more space. Clients began referring new business faster than we could keep up. We implemented profit sharing for the employees, and morale skyrocketed. One evening, months later, I drove past the old office building. It was dark, the windows dusty, a for lease sign swinging in the breeze. For a moment, I just sat there in my car, staring at it, remembering all the nights I'd spent inside working until my eyes blurred. And then I smiled. Because that building wasn't my prison anymore. It was just an empty shell, a reminder of who I used to be and how far I'd come. A few weeks later, we had a company barbecue outside the warehouse. Employees brought their families, music played, and kids ran around the parking lot. Carla stood next to me, holding a plate of food, and said, "You know, they talk about you like you're some kind of legend. The guy who wouldn't let them sink." I looked out at my team, my people, laughing, eating, living. "I'm not a legend," I said softly. "I'm just finally where I'm supposed to be." And that night, as I locked up and turned off the lights, I glanced once more toward the empty road that led back to my parents' house. I thought about all the years I'd spent chasing their approval, waiting for them to see my worth. But I didn't need them to see it anymore. They could keep their silence, their pride, their empty house filled with regrets. Because I had built something real, and this time, no one could take it from me. I locked the door behind me, smiled to myself, and whispered the words I'd waited years to say. Checkmate.